Many people never thought we would make it here, and yet we have. So, our first item on the agenda is the calendar, which is up in front of you. It will be a busy January. Heavens, Robin, those are all January. Okay. So, sleep well, eat your Wheaties, have holiday cheer, and then come back ready to go to a lot of meetings. Thank you for putting the Midwinter Mingle and the Teen Center Gala on the calendar. Any other additions to the calendar? Mingle.
She did not.
I did not, Ms. Stone, but
That
thank
was a
you.
creative mishearing.
Someone is making rather merry a little bit early. Okay. Consent agenda. We have a number of past records of office hours. We also have an out-of-state student trip to the Model United Nations Club of the United Nations Club to New York City. Do I have a motion for the consent agenda? Ms. Stone? Second. Mr. Glover? All those, do we have to vote these individually? We don't, do we? Okay, fine. Fine, we have that's why it's on our consent agenda. All right, Mr. Glover, thank you. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous of those of us here. Subcommittee reports. Mr. Chang was unfortunately called away at the last moment, so we'll skip his finance report for now. The only thing I'll say is that we will be discussing the no override scenario under agenda item 7B, so there'll be plenty of time to talk about finance if anybody wants to. Capital improvements, Mr. Pollack.
Let's see, the capital subcommittee has been busy. We just had a meeting moments ago in which we basically heard a preliminary, the capital subcommittee met today from 4:30 to 6 and had a long report of preliminary findings from the consultant SMMA that is carrying out with school, high school and administration staff, the Brookline High School visioning study, and they will be conducting more meetings with staff, public meetings, and returning to the school committee at some point to make an additional report. The capital subcommittee also met on the couple weeks ago recently and discussed the superintendent's short-term space plan proposals, which have been further revised. I don't know how many drafts we're into now, at least 10. And that'll be discussed later at this meeting, so we'll put that off. And also, Ms. Charlupsky and I attended the Building Commission meeting last week, and she was very busy taking notes, so maybe she could make a brief report for us. And then also after that, perhaps Ms. Cox can report on the Devotion School Building Committee meeting.
So first, the meeting that you were referencing, the Capital Subcommittee meeting was on the 9th of December, and the Building Commission was subsequent to that on the same night. Going in and out, okay. At that meeting, they talked about the Lawrence School, which I don't know if you know more. Well, I'll say a few things, and certainly, Ms. Stone, if you have more to add. They've fallen a little bit behind, about a month, but it was scheduled to be ready for May, so we should be fine. And there was a change order for $6,097, something having to do with the soil and whatever. But that's one of the ones that we had to sign, or will have to sign. I'm not sure if it's here yet. Old Lincoln, the architects were there, and they're moving along quite well, actually. Some issues with old buildings and retrofitting things, but overall, it seems like it's going along well, and they're very pleased with the contractor who's working there.
I think they're close to complete with demolition.
Correct, correct. And devotion, I think Abby will do that, right? Okay. Pierce Electrical, we signed that contract just recently.
Elevators?
No, it's an
For the electrical.
electrical systems upgrade that needed to happen. And the Baker roof was going out to bid or to get a quote on the seams of the Baker gym roof. Needed to be fixed, and that was it. That's all I have from
And
that meeting, except for the,
Thank you, and for the record, the school committee actually has signed the Lawrence School change order, because it was in the packet that we saw at the Finance Committee and subsequent executive session on Monday. Ms. Cox?
So the Devotion Building Committee met on Tuesday, December 16th, to review progress on the development of a schematic design for the Devotion project. The committee determined that the design would not be ready for the deadline required to make it to the March MSBA meeting, because that deadline would have been January 8th. Our new deadline is March 12th for the MSBA's June meeting. We've scheduled regular meetings up to that date, as well as 2 community meetings. The dates for the community meetings will be January 29th and March 2nd at 7 p.m., and they will be held at Devotion. The process continues in reviewing the 4 firms who have applied to be construction managers at risk for the Devotion project, and it's hoped that we'll bring a firm on board in early 2015. Owner's project manager, Tony Quigley, shared that as a result of the soil testing done over the Thanksgiving break, it's been determined that additional borings need to be done. The initial testing showed the possibility of an oil leak, which is believed to be from an oil line from the tank to the building. It's residual degraded oil, likely left over from an old tank. New borings and test pits will be performed over the holiday break in order to comply with Department of Environmental Protection regulations. Architects from HMFH showed modified plans with changes that responded to input from school staff. Dr. Connolly, who is the principal of Devotion, stated that he was very pleased with how responsive the architects have been to the suggestions of the educators in accommodating the education program. The next Devotion Building Committee meeting is scheduled for Thursday, January 22nd. There had been a meeting for the 5th of January, but that's canceled, so the next meeting is on the 22nd at 8 a.m. in room 111. At that meeting, the architects will present new plans for phasing with just K to 4th grade in the building, and we'll understand why when the superintendent presents later on his short-term space options. There's still hope of moving all students out of the building during construction. The architect's cost estimators have calculated a potential savings between $3 and $4 million in 1 year's worth of time. So that's something we're very interested in and would like to accomplish if it's at all possible, but we know how difficult it is to find space.
That's gross savings before expenses for renting another facility, et
Right.
cetera.
Good point, yep. 2 design working groups have been created by the committee at our last meeting. The Open Space Advisory Group also met on December 16th following the Devotion Building Committee meeting. That group includes the directors of Parks and Recreation, the town's landscape designer, and was also attended by many interested citizens, including representatives of town meeting and local environmental groups. Some of the topics discussed were the inclusion of a pedestrian plaza in front of the building and the management of traffic there, optimal placement of the school garden, and possible designs for the back field. They'll continue that discussion on Monday, January 12th at 9:30 a.m. The Architectural Review Advisory Group will hold its first meeting on Monday, January 12th at 8 a.m.
Followed by a second meeting of the site review committee at 9:30.
Right, so the
Oh, you
architect
said
goes
that already.
before,
Sorry.
and I just did them in reverse order.
Thank you. Any questions on Devotion School Building Committee or other capital matters that have been reported on?
just to add a little bit to the devotion, So there will be a tour of some of the playgrounds by the site committee. We will get out the date to people as soon as we can, make sure that the vice principal can make it, and that Parks and Rec, and anyway, to organize everybody who has to be there, and then the rest of the committee certainly can come, or we will give a list of the places that we have visited. We did that in the Runkle project, and it was very valuable because people started to imagine what they could have in terms of play structures, in terms of space utilization, in terms of outdoor classrooms, and what we have at current buildings.
So yes, I'm sorry, please.
Thank you. I just had a question about the playgrounds. I know that there's a lot of community involvement in these conversations, but Devo's playground is a heavily used playground, and I assume that if the site is under construction, that playground will be out of commission for quite some time. I just want to make sure that we are in touch also with I know that was when we were talking about the sharing of playgrounds with the daycare centers. There are more and more of them in...
That doesn't happen during the school day, no.
I know, but that playground is going to be out of commission entirely.
Oh, I understand.
And so I just want to make sure that we are in touch not just with the school community, but with other people in the community who rely on just about the planning, that's all.
Well,
And
the
both
abutters are notified
Okay.
of what's happening.
Both the Parks and the Recreation directors are on that working group, the site working group for the Devotion Building
That's
Committee,
really for
and we're
them
there.
to stay in touch with the people who use the parks. Okay, great, thank you. Thank you.
So we have before us, you have before you a contract between the town and Civic Moxie LLC for the school space or search study. We've discussed it before in this committee, and Kara Bruton, from the Planning Department, the town's Economic Development Director, is also here, and I'm sure would answer any questions. There are attachments to the contract which were distributed by email as well, a work plan and the RFP, which are part of the contract, although you don't have those parts in front of you, but they were distributed. And I think that as chair of the capital subcommittee, I would make a motion that the school committee adopt or approve this contract.
Great, there's a motion, there's a second. Is there a discussion?
Yeah, if you could just sort of briefly tell us the dates when this will be done, and a little bit of what, just so that...
Ms. Britton, we're so glad you're here.
So, Kara Bruton, Economic Development Director for the town. We hope to come back to you all kind of halfway through the process, which will likely be late January, early February. That will be a public meeting, hopefully a joint meeting between the school committee and the Board of Selectmen together. At that meeting, we'll be talking about the methods, the process, kind of checking in. There's likely not going to be site-specific, here's 3 sites that we're, zeroing in on. But I do expect that we'll be able to tell the public as much as we can without losing our own ground as far as a negotiator in the future as a land acquiring. So things like, here are some regions in town that are the most useful for the school department. Here are some broad topics that we've seen to give people a sense of where we're headed. And then we'll come back by the end of February, cross our fingers, with final, report. Again, hopefully joint meeting to school and Board of Selectmen. The end result will be a table, basically is what it comes down to. No decisions are being made by staff. There's going to be different columns, pretty simple: cost, time, complexity, and how useful is it going to be to the schools. And then the deciders are going to have to decide what to do with that information. But we're hoping to pull together this data for properties that haven't really been looked at in depth yet.
Dr. Jackson?
Hi. So I took a look at the scope document, which goes back and forth using language to speak to school, broadly speaking, and then it also speaks very specifically to elementary schools. And having just come out of a capital subcommittee meeting where we also then referenced a connection to the high school, I think it's a very different thing to scope property for a high school than it is an elementary. I could be wrong. But it would be great if that were either clarified or included, if that's in fact to your point about a table. Will the table say, yes, and you could build a high school that could accommodate,
Yeah.
that would be helpful to understand when we get that.
That's a good question, because even as we were writing the scope with school staff, we were kind of going back and forth a little bit on that. So the goal will be to find a site that's appropriate for another K-8 site. However, not just for, schools, but also town needs in general, as we go through, and if we see a site that looks like it would be awfully good for another need that we know that we have, we're not going to bury that. We're going to note it. We're going to have all of the interim data as we go along.
So just to clarify, I mean, I think that since the goal of this is to find either a different site for a ninth school, also, I think we're also looking at property that is adjacent to our existing K-8 schools.
Yes.
And I think the idea is not that we are the goal is not to identify sites for other purposes, but the point is during the analysis, if there are other uses, to flag them because there are potentially other studies down the road that will treat those properties in a separate process. But that's not actually, that's an interesting byproduct. That's not the goal of this study.
Right.
Okay.
Right, and as we move along, I'll be speaking often with Peter Rowe, and as things need, we will use a consultant as we need best.
But is there enough flexibility in the contract that allows for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's,
I
I
mean-
think, the most important part. If there's the flexibility in the contract that they're not just going to do X, Y, and Z, but that as we
Yeah. I
go
mean,
further down the
the
process.
main reason why
then-
we're using a consultant is to get that real estate expertise, to someone on the team who has construction dollar experience for this market, and then also another person on the team that has land acquisition experience for municipalities, for other public agencies, and to pull all those together. But as we move forward, we all know, including the team, that there's a lot of moving parts for the town broadly, and we're going to make the best use of that time.
Okay, great, thank you.
I just want to say thank you very much. We're excited. This is in your hands. As you know, some of us at this table have been pushing very, very hard to make this happen. And I think we're very excited about the idea of professionals doing this and not volunteer committees. So we're excited in many, many ways. We have faced a surprising amount of community opposition to this study, which has been a little bit surprising, but nonetheless, I think we have persevered and made it happen. So we're delighted that you're taking it on. Thank you. I think the other thing that I would say is as we get closer, further down the line in this process, everyone is very much behind the idea of a ninth school study now. I think once specific properties start getting discussed, obviously there will be a lot less unanimity. So I think just the point that we've been raising all along of what of this needs to happen in open session because it's got to be part of a community process, and which pieces of this actually can't happen in open session because we're talking about negotiations, where the legal counsel's involved, and you actually can't put a list of targets on a whiteboard. So I guess we will look forward to guidance from professionals and counsel and others as to how much we can say and what we can't say. But again, thank you for helping us persevere through some roadblocks that were unexpected to making this happen.
I think
We're
it'll be
very
good.
grateful.
And before I leave, I'll sit down, but before I leave, I would like those signatures
Yes.
because there are so many people that have signed this thing.
And the
So I'll just
selectmen have
wait.
already approved it last night.
They did. Thank you.
All right, so there's a motion, a second. Any more discussion? All right, we will vote. All those in favor of the contract, I mean, I guess we're going to sign the contract, but all those in favor, please raise your hand. Outstanding. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kara. Next, do you have anything else, Mr. Pollack?
That is my report.
Thank you. Curriculum, Ms. Charlepski.
So curriculum met on Wednesday, and I think my brain's already on vacation time because I didn't write up our report, but I do think we met and spoke and had actually an excellent presentation from the curriculum coordinator for Elementary World Language, Dawn Carney, who brought us up to date of what's happened in the last 7 years in that program, how we've progressed, and some of the exciting things that are happening for children in terms of Elementary World Language. I was actually at a subsequent meeting where there was a high school Spanish teacher presenting something, and we were talking, and she said, it's amazing how different the students are who are coming in now in terms of how they're prepared for language study and how much further along they are than kids who haven't had our Elementary World Language, that there's a substantial difference between those students. My understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that at some point we will have a presentation to the full school committee of the Elementary World Language.
So I think the discussion that we had was that during the FY16 budgeting process, we'll be considering a no override scenario and a scenario that envisions additional funds. And under that set of scenarios, once we have them, there will, we hope, be at least one of those scenarios that envisions a growth of the Elementary World Language program, and one of them which may envision the elimination of that program. And so I think the question that came up at the curriculum subcommittee meeting was, what is the process over the course of the next number of months as we think about that question to understand this piece at the table? And so I think it's going to get folded into a number of discussions like that. There will be a number of items like that over the next number of months that are considered for expansion, considered for elimination, whatever it may be, through the FY16 budgeting process. So this is one of them. So the answer is yes, it will come back here in some form.
Okay, that was my understanding, so that's why I'm not going to go into more detail about what we're doing, et cetera. Our next curriculum subcommittee meeting is in January 28th, and the topic will be the program review of ECS.
Enrichment and challenge.
Enrichment challenge. I'm on vacation already. Okay, enrichment and challenge
Support. Thank you, Ms. Charlowski.
It used to be gifted and talented, and that I could say.
Happy
and I
New
knew
Year,
it.
Helen.
Thank you.
Policy review, no, sorry, government relations, Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have in front of you, last time we looked at a first reading of the legislative priorities. There were some very helpful comments that were incorporated into the copy that you have in front of you. At your places, there is an updated copy because which has some very, very minor changes. I want to thank especially Abby and Helen, who got to me with pointing out a couple of typos and omissions that were helpful to fix. And so in front of you, the changes that are here from last time are the ones that were asked for, that is to say, moving, strengthening METCO into our core legislative priorities up front, and I think that was most of it, and then reaffirming our support for the other issues at the end, the 4 bulleted items, the foundation budget revisions, addressing weaknesses in the Common Core and associated testing, limiting tuition increases at out-of-district private schools for special needs, and funding for universal pre-K and full-day kindergarten got added off of our conversation last time. The only changes, in addition to the typos that got fixed, were under mandate relief. It was pointed out that the list did not include 2 things that should be included, including the recent gun control legislation, which has provisions in it for school safety and addressing mental health needs that could, in fact, have financial consequences and program consequences for us, as well as the new requirements for student discipline, that concern ongoing education for students who have been suspended or expelled. We're dealing with that in policy right now, but the implications for mandate relief are simply that that's another piece of legislation that is visiting upon schools, something that we would want to do. It's not that we have any objections to these policies. We think they're going in the right directions. What we have objections to are unfunded mandates that overburden our staff in the schools while they're trying to implement them in a responsible way. So those two things were added to the mandate relief and are in the copy that you're looking at. And aside from that, I think we are ready to put it forth for a vote, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, that sounded like a motion.
I would like to move this, yes.
All right, and Dr. Jackson, second. Is there any discussion? This is our second reading, so we've already had some, and the revisions are incorporated, as Ms. Stone said. All right, all those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for shepherding this. And we have letters here, so we will be, we've already sent a save the date, right, to our legislators. We have letters. We will send this to them. Do you want to just spend 1 minute saying what's different about this year, what we're going to do differently about our breakfast, so people have a sense of what to expect? It's
Well, as it
January
says in
15th.
at the end of the legislative priorities that we just passed, we are going to try, because of the change, because of the recent elections and because so many things are changing in state leadership, control of the Congress. So we're really hoping with this legislative breakfast to do more hearing from our legislators than talking to them about our priorities. We have most of what we're talking about here, we have talked about with them before. They are well aware. They've been very supportive. They've introduced legislation on our behalf. So there's nothing that new or dramatic in terms of what we're focusing on. And what we'd really like to know is how they're feeling about the new session on Beacon Hill, where they see the changes and what their priorities are for the new session. So we're going to try to flip it a little bit and hear more from them.
Terrific. All right, anything else? Policy review. Ms. Cox, you have a second reading and vote for us.
Yes, okay, so the second reading was the proposed revision of the policy on public conduct in school buildings, which is section, we're doing a second reading on the PSB policy on public conduct in school buildings, which is section K4 of the policy manual, and actually, we're not doing just a second reading, we're going to do a vote. Some suggestions at the first reading were incorporated into this new draft, which I believe everyone would have received electronically. I don't think there's a paper version here. We removed the amount of the fine that had been specified in the earlier draft, imposed for idling, but we know fines can change, and in the interest of not having to revisit that constantly, we just referenced that there would be a fine, and then it will be according to whatever the town is charging. And we also amended the last line of the policy to reflect that the school department, rather than the school committee, will work with the police department to enforce the provisions of this policy, as is their purview. The draft revision of this policy was posted for public comment on the school committee website on the policy page, but we did not receive any public comment on this issue. So no other additions or suggestions needed to be considered. It's really just the two changes from our reading at the last school committee meeting. So I would like to make a motion to adopt the revised version of K4.
Motion, is there a second? Ms. Stone? Any discussion? All right, as is our second reading, we've already had multiple rounds of feedback. Thank you very much. All those in favor? So it's, Mr. Pollock's out of the room, so it's 7. Do you want to vote for the revisions on the public conduct policy?
Yes.
Okay. 801.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
The policy subcommittee met on December 11th. We continued our work on section J7, which has to do with student discipline. This is a very complicated section based on new legislation that was passed at the state level. Our main effort is directed in finding an appropriate balance between protecting the rights of students who are accused of serious offenses and therefore face serious consequences, and ensuring our administrators' ability to carry through with disciplinary procedures in a manageable way that ensures the welfare of all students at a school. And a great deal of our discussion focuses on communication and making sure that parents and guardians are informed as effectively as possible. So we will be continuing our work on this section at our meeting on January 21st, and I will hope to be able to bring it to this body for a first reading soon. Additionally, we spoke about section J1, D, and E on redistricting impact and assignment of students to schools and buffer zones. We reviewed a draft for some changes to this policy based on the work done by the Ad Hoc Committee on Buffers in 2012. In this time of intense enrollment pressure, we know that buffers are an important tool for managing classroom size in the K-8 schools, and we're trying to make sure that our policy clearly reflects our practice and our values. We'll be continuing our work on this section as well at our meeting on January 21st. And that's all for policy.
Thank you, Ms. Carroll. Any other liaisons or updates? We are landing planes here. Ms. Cox, thank you.
Big night for reports from me. Hancock Village. The Zoning Board of Appeals issued a draft decision on December 15th. It proposes to issue a comprehensive permit to Chestnut Hill Realty for the construction of 161 units of rental housing, with 333 as the maximum number of bedrooms. At least 20% of the units in the project will be reserved as affordable housing. There is a condition attached to the decision that states all leases for the units in the project shall include language stating that tenants may not use any rooms other than bedrooms for sleeping purposes, which we would hope mean 333 is a maximum number, but we do know from experience that those are not always followed. On Monday, this Monday, December 22nd, the Zoning Board of Appeals will hold its last public hearing. After that, it has 40 days to conduct public meetings, but the 22nd will be the last opportunity for the public to provide testimony. And I don't know, I believe that the Public Schools of Brookline has been keeping tabs on this project. We are aware it's coming. We are ready to serve any student that comes into Brookline, but we do know that this will have serious impacts for the Baker School and the high school.
I would just add one piece of context, which everyone here is well aware of, but I've faced a surprising number of questions in the community about whether or not we have to educate children of renters. And the answer is yes, we have to educate the children of renters. There is no way around that. It's a question. I've gotten it a couple times.
I mean, I would just add to I mean, you said Baker and the high school, but because of the impact that such a project would have on the rest of the Baker district, it will also have impact on Lincoln, it will also have impact on Runkle, it will also have impact on Heath, and therefore there's a corresponding impact, right? It lessens as that wave goes out, but it does have impact on all of those schools because of the way our attendance areas work.
And I think it's also true to that point that, when, and Kara left, but when we were discussing redistricting, or we were discussing the impact of a ninth school study, that thinking about Hancock Village in the picture and not in the picture were both scenarios that we wanted to have run as part of that ninth school study, because whether or not it happens, and it's not we don't necessarily need to opine on whether or not it's going to happen in order to model a scenario. And so I think what part of the discussion with JED and GIS and the other folks in town who can help us with redistricting maps is that we want to see that both ways, and the ninth school study impacts both ways. Ms. Stone?
I know that the school committee has submitted in writing, I think there was a letter last February from then Chairman Morse on behalf of the school committee to the ZBA, but it might be worth having a statement delivered at that last public hearing on our behalf from our liaison, if that's at all possible. But But I would think that we could simply take that letter, which was very clear about all of the concerns of the schools, update it a little bit with what Ms. Didkoff just said, and use that as our statement. But I think it's worth reiterating that we are still concerned, we are still involved, and still watching it.
I was planning to attend that, so I would be happy to deliver a statement like that on behalf of the committee if the committee wishes me to.
Well, I guess the part of the question is like, what, if there's a point? I mean, we can. Does anyone particularly wish to restate all of the potential impacts on the school district if the Hancock Village piece comes through? The question is whether there should be an additional statement from the school committee in addition to statements that have been made in the past about potential impacts of Hancock Village on the district.
Not an additional statement, just essentially having Ms. Cox deliver that statement at that last meeting.
What's confusing to me, you said they already decided? So what would
They issued a draft decision, and I think they're opening the floor for public comment on Monday night, after which they will have to issue a final decision by mid-January.
okay, I just didn't realize they do a draft and then they do the full in the past, yeah? And do things change at any time when that happens? I mean, is there?
In the one situation that I'm familiar with that involved us, the answer to that question is yes.
Your
There
microphone's
were
on.
Sorry. In a prior situation, yes, there were changes between that draft and the final determination.
So then, it seems to me that reiterating our points might not be a bad idea.
Once more with feeling, Ms. Cox, thank you for offering, I think you just did, to write something up and
voluntold.
circulated it. Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure you offered to restate the impact this might have on the public schools of Brookline. Dr. Jackson?
If there's time, because I know this is soon, to review or get a copy, if you're just going to use the old one, it'd be great for those of us who haven't seen it, just to see what's in it, so we're aware.
Do we have the old one? When is it again? It's next week. Yeah, so if people want to read it over the weekend, we can send that out. Okay. Robin will send it out. All right. Other liaisons or any other, yeah. Mr. Pollack.
This is really circling back somewhere between the capital report and maybe the superintendent's short-term plans, but there was news from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and perhaps Dr. Lupini, you could fill us in on that briefly?
Sure, Mr. Pollack, thank you. So we did receive a determination that the Driscoll School Statement of Interest would not be invited into the eligibility period for 2014-15, for the upcoming period. And laying out, I believe it was stated as two different numbers in two different places in the letter. There were actually 108 SOIs that were submitted. I don't know the number that were selected. I know that there were some major projects in this round, high schools, larger schools. And the letter also laid out the opportunity that we had to submit Driscoll or to reconsider and submit another project in the next round, the window of which opens on January 9th. I believe it's a date in mid-April, is the due date. Thank you, is the due date for SOIs. And so partially off of the discussion we had earlier, the school committee and board of selectmen will need to determine in that time frame whether we submit an SOI and what that SOI would be. I know there are changes to the SOI process. We don't yet know what they are. we know what some of them are, but we'll see that when they post the documentation, I believe the first week of January.
Okay. I mean, certainly, I think it highlights the challenge of long-term capital planning in a municipal environment where we are rapidly growing. I think there's a lot of understandable frustration in the community of why can't we just make a decision and stick to it and execute on it in 18 months? And given how many state agencies are involved in different decisions, how many different boards and agencies are involved, the SOI process is not something we have full control over. And so one of the interesting things, for me anyway, this past number of days as the news has gotten out, is that I think there's been more recognition among people in the community of, oh, wow, I understand now that you can't just make a decision and execute it, that you have to go through many different town bodies, through different state bodies, and months or years of work can all stop. So it would be terrific if we potentially had that sort of ability to behave like a business, but we don't. We're a democracy, and we all know and love that. So we will continue to do our best at breakneck pace, which can feel glacial to some. Anyone else? Any other things? So the only other thing is, I will say, the Board of Selectmen last night discussed a timeline on the override, which, if I can find it, I will try to share with you as quickly as I can. It started with next week's meeting, where they are going to discuss the spreadsheet. Are we going to talk about the spreadsheet tonight, under a no override? At some point, we're trying to put all the numbers onto one sheet of paper. Mr. Rowe and the superintendent have tried to put the 100% scenario, the 90% scenario, the 65% scenario onto one sheet of paper. I think the superintendent referenced this a couple weeks ago at the Board of Selectmen meeting. So I think they're going to want to talk about that. During the week of January 6th, they're going to talk about different options to put on the ballot. During the week of the 13th, they anticipate settling on some options on what to put on the ballot. During the week of the 20th, they're anticipating morning and evening hearings. They haven't scheduled the date, but not on the Tuesday night time slot, and then they're hoping to vote on ballot wording either the last week in January or they targeted the last week in January. So that's their timing. Scotto.
Another liaison report. Last Friday, I attended the Metco conference. There were a goodly number of Brookline staff who were in attendance as well. It was an all-day conference, starting out with a very good speaker, a Dr. Mark Lamont Hill, who is a distinguished professor at Morehouse and was interesting and motivating. From there, you could go to workshops. I went to one on the Tenacity Challenge, which is run by out of the Bedford Public Schools. It was started by the superintendent there, which has teams of kids, 6 kids in high school who compete. And there were some films of what they had done, and it was quite impressive. I know that Brookline has been involved in this in the past, and I don't know if they're currently doing it. I then went to an absolutely fascinating program on white privilege, and there was a lot of discussion among the participants in small groups and in groups as a whole, with many people talking about examples of white privilege that they as staff members had experienced or had experienced in other contexts. But the thing that was striking was a video that was shown of a conversation between Maya Angelou and Charlie Rose, which I think is available on YouTube or maybe available on WGBH. It was on his regular program, in which he asked her when she thought she might write something that was not about race. And her response to him was absolutely right on devastating, and he just kind of sat there and hemmed and hawed, and it's really worth looking at because we don't think about white privilege all of the time, and it's very, very embedded. And one of the things that the group talked about, were asked about, was what would make you more aware of white privilege? And any number of people, myself included, was having somebody point out to me when I do something that really is because I am white and privileged. Because you don't notice what you're doing. You don't notice the things you say that other people might find offensive. And this was a very, very powerful workshop in which we sort of looked at our own behavior and looked at how people treated us versus how people of color were treated. So I recommend that you look up this video of Charlie Rose's interview with Maya Angelou. It's quite amazing.
Questions for Ms. Scotto? All right, we could have a movie night. Any other liaisons? Okay, public comment? Okay. No one signed up for public comment. Is there anyone here who wants to make public comment?
I would just like to do one brief.
Dave, Mr. Knight, if you would come up to the microphone, give us your name and street.
Hi, I'm David Knight. I live at 5 Maple Street, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 5. I would just like to encourage everyone here and everyone listening, if people have opinions on the different plans that the school committee is working on, I would encourage the people that are involved to take those plans to the school committee or people within the town and not write directly to Massachusetts Building Authority with their own plans and their own ideas. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. It's not our policy to comment on public comment, but we do listen. Thank you. Anyone else? Ms. Miska.
Good evening, Elizabeth Mishka from CPAC, and I haven't been here for a couple of sessions. So here's my little 1-minute plug. Thank you for all of the hard work you're doing and all of the different plans that are coming all the time for the override, and we hear. And always be thinking about all the children, but especially our special kids. Whether we're building new spaces, moving them, staffing them. That's just so you can hear me. I'm here, I'm listening. Anytime you guys want to share ideas, plans before they actually go into action, we would love to know about them as soon as we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mishka. Anyone else? Sure.
Oh, I just wanted
Can you
to...
give us your name and...
Yeah, so I'm Marina Ostankovic. I'm a parent at Lincoln School. And I have also a special child. And I would like to thank the school committee and the town hall to all the work that has been undergoing to try to leverage the amount of technologies and computers that have been brought, especially in our school. And it's the first, I think it's the first year the children can feel it and can use all these Google forms and also this new, all the availability, the different websites that are available to help differentiation teaching. And this is for parents who have children who have different skills and who could be very skilled in some areas, but who have very challenging others. This is extremely important that all of the technologies and the wonderful programs that are developed by people, by scientists who know very well sometimes how hard it is to catch information from a school teachers. There are so much wonderful websites and new technologies, even from MIT, from everywhere around here. There are a lot of scientific who are really devoted to build their own website that now it's available, and thanks to you and your efforts, it's coming to the classroom. And there are also a lot of different, I use them all the time, and I was using here with my children before coming here, like all this reading, so I don't want to take too much time, but all this reading software again and math software to help differentiate learning again. There are so many things out there that it's very important it comes to us. So
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Anyone else wish to make public comment? All right, thank you very much. And we are on track for our student report. Mr. Khan.
Thank you. At BHS, we've had the Camerata concert and the freshman play since we last met, and then also the winter concert is on Friday, and the new sports season is starting. In other news, there's been a lot of conversation at the high school about race, kind of like what you were saying, and part of it was highlighted in a Boston Globe article, particularly about the race committee in SWS with Abby Erdman, who you've all met. And so there's just been a lot of conversations about how we could do things better at the high school about race and things that we are doing well. And in student council this week, last week, we got information from Mr. Mason about the attendance policy and the effects it's had on attendance. And I won't get into all the details, but it's shown an overall decrease in absences pretty significantly, I think about 22%. And it doesn't have a whole lot of student support, but it has a lot of faculty support. And I'm sure you can all see the reasons why. Also in legislature today, we passed a bill about homework. The bill was brought up by student council, and the purpose of the bill was to make it so that there would be designated homework-free days after the term ends and before report cards are issued and before progress reports cards are issued. It hasn't been passed by Ms. Holman yet, so there's definitely a possibility of a veto, but it has been passed by legislature. That's all.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Khan?
You mentioned seeing the report on attendance. I wondered whether you had a copy of it and would share it with the school committee.
Oh, I do. It's just a spreadsheet that I got from Mr. Mason. It's not labeled, but I can pass that around.
Why don't we get the report, the full report?
I think that would be more appropriate, yes. I don't think, yeah,
Okay.
let's not circulate spreadsheets, but it would be great if we could take a look at the report. Thank you.
Yes, unlabeled spreadsheets sometimes do more harm than good. It'd be helpful to get. Okay, other questions? All right, thank you very much. Congratulations on making it to December, what's today? 18th.
Thank you.
Congratulations on making it this far. Superintendent's report, Dr. Lupine.
Thank you. 3 or 4 items, and you should have a copy of the report. 23 of our students attended the Girls Who Build conference at the MIT Lincoln Labs in Lexington. Arnie Marcus really played a huge role in enabling our students to attend. Actually, our students represented 23 of the 50 people who attended the conference. So this conference, which is designed exclusively for high school girls, was an introduction to engineering through wearable technology. The full-day workshop consisted of 2 major hands-on projects in manufacturing and wearable electronics. Activities included 3D printing jewelry and laser cutting a purse, as well as programming LEDs to light up when walking. Our girls learned the design process, 3D computer modeling, and machine shop tools, in addition to writing code and building a circus. So thanks to Arnie for making that happen for our students. We have, let me find it, for the 6th time in 7 years, we have a Posse Scholar at Brookline High School. Tanisha DeLeon, who's a senior, has been selected as a Posse Scholar and will receive a full tuition scholarship to attend Center College in Danville, Kentucky. Posse, as some of you know, is a highly selective college access and leadership program. She was one of 660 students selected from more than 15,000 nominations. She is the sixth Brookline High School student to win this award in the last 7 years. As a member of Posse, she will join a multicultural team of 10 students from Boston, participate in team building and leadership training during the spring and summer, and then they will attend Center College together beginning in the fall. Congratulations to Tanisha. We're about to implement building rental and user fees beginning in January, specifically Extended Day, Voices Boston, Brookline Music School, Brookline Staff Children's Center will pay for the use of our spaces in building. Mr. Rowe will be attending a BDAC, Brookline Extended Day Advisory Council meeting in January to discuss those requirements. We're ready, starting on January 5th, to roll out the staff and parent surveys. Parents will get a letter before the close of business next Tuesday mentioning that we're going to start this process on January 5th. It will then begin on January 5th with survey emails and also printed versions available in translated languages for our parents. It will end on the 20th, and our principals will get results starting in early February to use with their school councils in their planning process. And thanks to Corey Stott, who's really been the lead on that. We have a busy January and February. So in January and February, you will hear from Monica Crowley about the academic program being planned at Devotion at Old Lincoln School for what will hopefully what you will approve as our grade 5 through 8 tonight. You'll hear about our recent coordinated program review from Dr. Schmuckler, who will talk about that DESE review, including key changes in practices being implemented, planned and implemented as a result of that. You will hear in February about the high school concept study. School committee heard about that concept study tonight. We'll then be taking it to the staff and to the community in January, and we'll be back here hopefully for a joint meeting with the Board of Selectmen in February. You'll hear by February 5th about the administrative structure and compensation study. There'll be some opportunity for school committee to give input to that early in January, and by February 5th, you'll be hearing from our consultants. You'll hear about our recent circuit breaker audit, where the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education was here in order to give us feedback on our compliance with the law around circuit breaker claims. And as was mentioned earlier at Curriculum Subcommittee, you'll hear about the Enrichment and Challenge Support Program Review on January 28th. Very, very busy. Oh, and there's this budget thing that we're doing during January and February as well that you may have heard something about. So it's a busy couple of months that we have coming up, and I wanted to lay some of those activities out for you. That's my report. If you have any questions?
Ms. Stone?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Dr. Lupini, could you just remind us, or maybe it's just me, what the focus of the parent survey is?
Well, it's school culture, essentially. So again, we started with the Tell Mass survey that the state had used for the past number of years. We've incorporated questions from a number of different sources, but it essentially gets at school culture, the goals that have been set by the schools, because there are some individual questions for schools, and elements of teaching and learning, elements of leadership that are all asked of parents and staff. Those results then principals will have and will be able to use with their school councils in helping to shape their future school improvement plans. And principals, have been very open about wanting to use them in their own improvement efforts. I mean, I think I said to this committee at least once that I thought we should implement this in a way where principals had some control over questions that were specific to them, that could be viewed as evaluative, and that they should control those in the evaluation process with me. The principals said no. They said they wanted them to be made part of the public release, that they wanted them to be part of what they had for school improvement efforts, that they wanted them to be part of their conversations with me about their evaluation. Is that helpful? Okay.
I'm just glad at all the different opportunities here that there are for community input on things, parent surveys, the community input on the high school concept study, and a variety of other places. So thank you for that. And I would just also say that there was a little bit of confusion in the community about the building rental and user fees because we've already implemented some of them. I think there was a confusion that this committee was rejecting the entire override study committee idea that we rent out our spaces to partners. But since we had already implemented it, I think the question that you had addressed the other night in front of the Board of Selectmen was additional rental fees on top of these rental fees. And so there was just a little bit of confusion because people thought that off of the other night that meant that we were not charging partners rental fees.
So a couple comments on that. So first, what the override study committee imagined were much higher, larger charges of even partner organizations, which we have not. We did not implement in this year's budget, and even next year when they go into place for a full year, while our revenue will double, it merely doubles because of a full year of implementation, not because we've adopted those fees. The second part of what the override study committee commented on was their belief that we could maximize revenues around rental of other spaces, in particular gyms. And as we explained to the Board of Selectmen, in doing that, they were either imagining that we would reject our partnership with the rec department and therefore rent these spaces to other parties, or they were imagining that we would charge the recreation department, because you couldn't get to their numbers unless you did one of those two things. So given our ongoing relationship with the recreation department, our sharing of space, our use of the Lynch Center, which is their building, that isn't really possible. So that's helpful.
I just want to make a personal statement, which might be a statement from the committee, which is that my understanding is that we very much understand that we need to raise revenues in ways that we had not previously thought about, and our way to deal with that are what we voted into this year's contract by having very productive discussions with our partners and in fact charging them, which will in fact have impact on children and families out in the community in terms of Extended Day and Voices Boston and some of the other folks. And so I just want to make sure that everyone understands that we do think that we need to do our part by increasing our non-tax revenues, and in fact we are, to the tune of several $100,000. And that is what this is. It is not a rejection of the concept. It is a rejection of the full potential that the Override Study Committee imagined, which may not be actual feasible to capture.
There's a full year implementation of what you voted on last year nets $250,000 in rental. There was a lot of work that went into getting to where we've gone to in this. And, as Peter Villa said to the Board of Selectmen, and I have the utmost respect for Peter Villa, who's just a terrific person to work with on these things, we worked with the school department because we didn't have a choice. So, I don't think anybody's real happy about this, us, our partners, but everybody's trying to do some part of their share to make sure we can try to make these numbers work for the needs of the school system and our children.
Anything else? All right, thank you very much. School committee actions. Our first action is the 2015-2016 school calendar with early dismissal dates. We've already discussed this once. This is our second reading and potential vote. Dr. Lupini.
So the calendar proposal now has, and again, I apologize for this not getting out sooner. As many of you know, as you all know, Mrs. McHugh was not in the office with us the last week plus, and so to her credit, managed to complete this in the days since she returned. Again, the school year starts for teachers on the 1st and 2nd prior to Labor Day. It starts for students on the 3rd and 4th, also prior to Labor Day, and continues on the 8th when we return from the Labor Day vacation weekend. It ends without snow days on June 17th, something we were really trying to accomplish. keeps us 2 weeks removed from that last week of June. We've plugged in the traditional mandated by the collective bargaining agreement early release days around professional development, around parent conferences, those pieces. And so I think the rest of the calendar, unless there are questions, probably speaks for itself. But I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Questions for the superintendent on the calendar? It's very exciting that we might end on the 17th.
That would be very exciting.
It's very colorful with all the
Thank you.
triangles, circles. It's almost like a bowling scorecard with the strikes and spares. Yes, Dr. Jackson.
I think I might know the answer to this question, but following June 17th, there's a week in brackets, and I'm just trying to find in the thing what the brackets mean. I'm assuming that's our...
Following what, I'm sorry?
Sorry, the June 17th, where we got the big in.
Makeup days for cancellation.
Is that all the makeup
Yeah,
days that
that's-
following
that's-
week? Okay,
Yes.
thanks for clarification.
Okay, so we will vote this, and enabling our families to plan. They can spend their holiday buying plane tickets or planning car trips. Do we have a motion? Dr. Jackson, do I have a second? No one over here, no one over here seconds, because I'm just looking over it. Ms. Scotto, thank you. All those in favor? All right, it's unanimous. Thank you. All right, so our next item is discussion and possible action on the superintendent's contract. Tonight, we will vote on the superintendent's contract. We're a little bit behind since we're already in the year that we're voting on, but we've discussed a number of items in executive session, and in the end, we decided to leave the contract as is, but update it for FY15 compensation. And the discussion that we had, but we need to vote on in public session, is as follows: that we would increase the superintendent's salary by 1%, and add a $2,500 payment to match the new top step of the teacher's contract from last year, and there would be an increase of money to the life insurance premium. So I will move the contract. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Stone. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Lupini. It's been quite a year. We are getting back on track so that I get my contract renewed, since I've been late, nothing but late this year. It's very exciting to be back on track. Presentation, proposed vote on the superintendent's recommended short-term space plan, which is why I assume all these people are here. We're very excited to
So for this one, I'm
hear
going
it. Put on turn microphone.
to sit, and I'm actually going to, because I actually did make one change to it. So if you go down to the Pierce section of this report, let's start here. That last bullet should say school year 2016, 2017. You should have it, right, Ms. Coyne? Yes. So it should say school year, last bullet under Pierce, school year 2016, 2017. So I may ask Mr. Rowe to help me with some pieces of this, but let me start with a bit of a disclaimer. For any of this that sounds less than transparent tonight, it's because we are in a number of situations where we are talking to owners of buildings. We are facing potential negotiation over portables, those kinds of things. And so as to not compromise our negotiation position, I'm going to be somewhat nonspecific on some of those items again tonight. I will say that we still have some options within this plan, right? There are still a number of places where we're saying this or this or this. We are pursuing all of those avenues right now, and some of them will show themselves to not be possible within some period of time. And I'll try to talk a little bit about those as well. But essentially, we believe we have a solid plan for you, and we would ask you to adopt this so that we can begin moving on first of all, on the pieces that we do know, and second of all, we can continue to refine those pieces that we're still working on. So we're going to talk again about 3 schools. in this plan. We're going to talk about the Devotion School, the Pierce School, and the Baker School. And I'll start with Devotion. So the Devotion plan calls for us to move the 7th and 8th grade students to the Old Lincoln School in school year 2015-2016, not because the renovation is beginning, but because of a lack of capacity on site to house Devotion students, and I would say, and staff. Transportation plan and costs are yet to be determined, although we're looking at a number of options, including the idea of a staggered time start, which would benefit parents and would also help us better control any potential transportation costs, because we could use the same buses. We would continue to search for space to relocate Devotion School grades K to 4 to another building, and I'll say here tonight, or buildings, during the renovation. We would need to evaluate the cost of any potential space, along with student transportation, to the point Mr. Pollack made earlier, against the savings of time, which we've been told is anticipated to be 1 year, and dollars anticipated to be $3 to $4 million, associated with providing an empty building to our project contractors. Simply put, if everyone's off the campus, we've been told we save $3 to $4 million and a year. We would have to evaluate that against the cost of the rental property and the transportation. And remember that one of the things that we have to factor in here is we might actually be in a position where we would need to rent property this coming year for years in the future when we actually need it. So that could be problematic. In 16-17, we would move Devotion School grades 5 and 6 to Old Lincoln School, where they would join grades 7 and 8. And they would be there through the conclusion of the Devotion construction project, which is either beginning when Devotion would reopen in September of 19 or September of 18, depending on how many students we were able to move out and if the contractor was able to meet their timelines. And of course, we would do something with K to 4 if we were to locate that space and be able to test it, and it met these conditions. That is, it was within costs, right? We made that judgment. So that's the Devotion plan. And as I've said from the beginning of this, the reason that is so important is if you went certain ways with the Devotion plan, then the Old Lincoln School was no longer available to the other two schools. Under the plan we're giving you tonight, the Old Lincoln School is no longer available to the Pierce School or the Baker School population. So let me stop there and see if there are questions there, and then I'll go on. Dr. Jackson.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be
okay.
so anticipatory. So to your statement when you first started, which
Yes.
is helpful, so some of this is are pieces of this we are able to move forward.
Yes.
If we approve and accept and go.
Yes.
Pieces of this are still yet to be determined.
And would have to come back here with
And revisit.
Sure.
So the second bullet, where we're sort of hoping to get that K4 with the hope
Yes.
to save the money that you mentioned earlier, at this time, there is no other, if that didn't work out, if we
yes.
couldn't
Then
find
K to
that
4
space,
will be at Devotion
then we
during the
will
project.
leave, okay,
Yes.
so we're not going to then pursue any other options. This is that,
And it's a great question, because there's a certain time
right, where it becomes too late, right?
when we're done.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, even you may have heard earlier tonight that the next Devotion building meeting is an update of the phasing plan, which now considers K to 4 in the building instead of K to 5. And by the way, our architects are thrilled with that one grade level. It changes many things about our phasing. It's all good, right? But it's not everyone, right? So all these have sort of deadlines to them when, if we found a property in January of 2016, yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'd still have a conversation about it, but it's really too late. Okay. Yes.
So one thing I think I read in Tony Quigley's memo to us about the $3 to $4 million was that the cost estimators, and it's just a point, it's not a really important one, but the cost estimators assumed, I think, $1 million of soft costs in terms of transportation and rental.
Yeah, but they were making that assumption around the 7th and 8th graders.
You think it was just for that?
They were,
piece?
I know that. They were making those assumptions around what they knew at the time, which is that we were going to move 7 and 8. Yes, 6, 7, and 8, excuse me.
Right, okay.
So
All right, so
how much
there were
more would it need?
additional- okay,
Exactly.
Okay, that part,
Exactly.
I guess I didn't read it right.
And the other thing I guess I should emphasize here is we are open, depending on location, we are open to the idea of K to 4 being in more than one place, if it helps with this problem. And it bears repeating for me to say that we are open to locations that are not in Brookline. In fact, the locations we're looking at are not in Brookline, but they need to be close enough, right, to make this plan work. Okay?
So, I just want to come back to Dr. Jackson's question, which is, what are we voting on? What we're voting on is that this is sort of the current state of affairs.
Yes.
And that we're essentially constraining and narrowing the universe to either K through 4 stays at Devo or it goes somewhere else. And that's
And
the
5
option.
through-
We're
and
kind of
5
voting it's going to be one of those two things.
And 7 and 8 goes next year, and 5 and
Right.
6 join them the following year, yes.
Right.
That's what you're
And then
voting
we will
on.
get some sort of update as to which of those ends up playing out depending on the
You will.
negotiations, but
You
that's
will.
the vote.
You
Is that-
will.
Is that clear? Everybody good on? Okay.
Well, and every one of these, it's a great set of questions, because every one of these has those kinds of elements to it.
Well, exactly, and because it's not one thing, we're voting on a constrained set of options. I just want everyone to be clear on what we're voting and what we're waiting for, that's all. Because we need to be moving forward on
Right.
it. Okay.
Sure.
Mr. Glover?
I was just wondering, could you put a little color on the level of need for moving the 7th and 8th graders next year? Why is it so critical that be done?
Yeah, when we originally played this out, we were short some number, 2 to 3 minimally, of classrooms per se, but that's not the totality of the issue. It's also the adult workspaces, it's also specialist spaces. I mean, we're out of room, we're out of time at Devotion. And so it's really all of those elements that have led us over time, even with the slight declines that we've seen in grades 4 through 8. And we spent quite a bit of time, some of you were there, in the forum with parents sort of testing out this idea, and got very, very positive feedback to moving next year rather than trying to do consolidations to squeeze, because it's classrooms, it's specialist rooms, and it's where the adults work that we're just out of. If that's helpful.
That is helpful, thank you.
If K to 4 stays in the building, does that not complicate the design of the building? That is to say, if K to 4 is in place X, they have to move someplace else, which may need to have some renovation in order for them to be able to move there. And that's fine and well and good, I suppose, except that then you have to move them back somewhere else. So that if you wanted to move them back to the same place, you've had to do intermediate renovation, which costs more money.
So here's the issue, right? Here's where it has impact. And Mr. Rowe, when I get this wrong, please rescue me. But because you have to phase, without even talking about what that means, you have to make certain choices, right, as to what your building is going to look like, right? And the most obvious in this that I remember from the conversation just the other day had to do with one location of the power plant, right? And where that would go, because you were going to have to open this part of the building, you therefore had to locate a power plant there, when maybe that wouldn't have been a decision you would have made, So to your point, I think we're saying the same thing. So there are some of those kinds of things. I don't think I've seen anything in this design that said you're making choices that ran so far into choices you might have made. I didn't hear anything like that.
No, neither have I.
Right.
But your point is, yes, it's clearly more complicated.
Right.
For the architect in certain elements, and that was a good example where in the first phase where one wing, the wing that's beside Zoftig's, which will be torn down and then rebuilt, that's where they're going to put the boiler room and the other mechanical systems, because then they'll be built for the entire school when that wing comes out. And then in the second phase, that wing will be occupied. They'll be able to connect that to the rest of the building. If we knew that we could empty the entire building today, they might modify that slightly.
Right.
I mean, I don't think it would change significantly. But clearly, the idea of having to move kids into the first new wing when it's built after phase one, there'll be some compromise in there, and so it's not ideal. It's something that does happen regularly, and we believe that we can do it safely. But if we could get all the kids out, we'd actually like to do that.
Sure.
I have yet to find the spaces that will allow us to do that, and so that's what we're continuously looking at. And as the superintendent said, we're really at a point where we're willing to look at multiple other locations. But to the point of cost, remember that actually may create additional operating costs as well. In other words,
Right.
if you have multiple sites, you have to consider how do I get multiple medical services or guidance services or, supervision. So there's a complexity to that and a cost to that as well. But we haven't closed the door on any of that. We just haven't found the spaces yet.
And just to say something that I've said over and over again, but still seems to be a point of confusion in the community, Mr. Rowe, you did not start looking for spaces to relocate the devotion students 2 weeks ago.
No, we started a couple of years ago, actually, in
Years ago.
conversations primarily with Boston.
Right.
Thank you.
Hoping that they might have some space. They've actually they had closed the door on a lot of opportunities, even years before that, where they've leased facilities out to charter schools. There still could be some change that happens. We don't expect that we're going to have a full building in Boston. The area where I think folks have accurately spoken of, and I talked to the superintendent about this, was their superintendent about this, was where they've had drop in enrollment and where they do have some capacity is in some of their high school buildings. But there's a big difference between trying to put some of our kids in a high school building shared with high school kids as opposed to having a freestanding building that we
And
can
at the risk
occupy.
of boring those of us who've been here before, you have also talked to districts in Newton, Watertown, Cambridge, multiple other towns. You have looked at private
And the
parochial
Archdiocese,
schools,
right.
the Archdiocese, private parochial schools, other types of buildings. So this has been a long process.
Right, and it continues, but part of the issue is that, we're at a point now where for design issues and for planning issues, we're really beginning to be worried, and since folks want to have an answer to what we're doing, the superintendent wants to make sure we narrow the options, but we're not going to walk away from continuing to search,
Right.
because something could still break in our favor.
Right.
So, Ms. Charlevsky.
Therefore, if anyone out there listening,
As a building.
or has a building, or anybody in the audience knows of a building, please, Mr. Rowe is open to any and all suggestions.
Extension 2424.
Anywhere up to 500 kids, 5 classes per
500
grade.
would be great,
Yeah, but-
maybe even the whole school in one place.
Particularly large living room.
And Mr. Rowe, thank you for providing your phone
Thank you.
number on television. That was appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, so
Oh, sorry, Ms. Stone.
Sorry, Dr. Lupini, apropos of some of the earlier comments from the public, is it possible to walk us through how we've talked about the grades. Devotion is a big school, it has a town-wide program. How are we thinking about, as we talk about the transitions for the grades, how are we thinking about the transitions and the breaking up of those support programs?
in the short-term plan? Or the building that we're building? Or both?
No, not in the new building. The new building, I know that's a robust conversation, but in terms of the interim during the construction, how do we split up devotion, and how do we account for splitting up the programs that are there?
So like this. So I've told this story a number of times, and a number of years ago, we were asked, we initially slated that at Devotion School in the 15-16 school year, we would move grades 6, 7, and 8. The parents, to your question, asked us why all 3 grades. Looks to us like you need 2. Why all 3? And I said, because of those district-wide programs and the way the grade spans are grouped. But we would go back and we would look and we would see if we could manage quality programs that were in the interest of our kids in some other kind of move or configuration. And so we did. And to a lot of people's credit, Mark Nocht, a special ed supervisor for that building, and the principal and lots of other people we went through student by student, looked at projections for students, right, that were viewed as any point in the pipeline of possibly even looking at that program, looked at their grade levels, and made a determination off of that we could reconfigure the grade spans and do that. We did the same thing when we considered 5 and 6 instead of just 6 through 8. We do that every time. We do that every time. So as I am sitting, I may make the idea of splitting Devotion into 3 different locations sound somewhat easy. I was going to say easy, but I'll say somewhat, and it's not, because it really involves doing exactly what was requested or what was said in public comment and has been said a number of times every time. Just as we do it as we plan buildings. So many of you have been to Devotion Building Committee meetings and know what we've done around spaces and why we've made those decisions in the interest of students and programs. And same thing happens in these short-term spaces. And there are some areas where we've said this place doesn't work so well because it doesn't provide us with the opportunity to do X, which we need to do for this school. Right? Okay?
Thank you.
Just, again, on the movement of the 7th and 8th graders next year.
Sorry?
Excuse me, on
7th and 8th
the
grade
movement
next year.
of 7th and 8th graders next year, you mentioned that you've received a lot of support from parents for this idea. Can you talk a little bit more about what sort of public outreach process there's been with that? I'm not concerned, but I just want to know and make sure that this isn't going to come as a huge shock for some of the Devotion parents, and make sure that they're all.
No, we've actually been talking about the 7th and 8th grade. We've been talking about the move of some grade levels. Mr. Rose said for 2 years, right? We narrowed in on that number of grade levels about a year ago. We've continued to talk about it, and in fact did so. I think I've done 3 forums and a couple of other building committee meetings around these issues where the issue of the short term is always part of that agenda throughout the last year, and in fact was there in November. I'm looking for help here. November-ish, when we really laid out specifically the idea of, given the enrollment decline, if we could take these steps around consolidations instead of doing that, and for those in attendance, was pretty roundly rejected as an idea. So there've been a number of conversations over at least the last year about this element. And while I would never promise that someone won't be surprised by it, I went through a redistricting effort in Beverly where one school was closing, and while that had been talked about for 4 years, a gentleman came to a forum I did one night at that building in the last months of the school and raised his hand and said, "I didn't know this school was closing." So I would never pretend that we've reached everyone. I think we've done a lot of outreach. Joe Connolly's done a lot of outreach. We've done a lot of outreach, made ourselves available for a number of conversations around the elements of this move.
Okay.
Sorry.
and I appreciate that, and I trust that a lot of efforts have been made. I am still a little bit concerned that if we vote this tonight, to do this, that I just want to be very sure that we're not going to receive it.
Well, we've actually put, every time we've reduced this to writing over the last number of meetings, we've put that on the website, we've made that available.
Yeah,
so.
I just want to make sure at all of the, I guess my concern is that at all of the forums that you had, that it was very clear that this was a discussion of something that was.
I
Yeah.
think it was.
Abby, do you want to say anything? I mean, what's your sense of this being?
Well, I'm one of those parents who's going to be affected by this. And I would say that it has been pretty clearly understood, I think, in the parent population that the idea was that the 7th and 8th would move to Old Lincoln. I think there might have been a little confusion at the last parent forum when we were talking about the idea of evaluating that, but I would agree that the sentiment in the room was that people in that building understand how crowded things are. That we have literacy specialists trying to assess kids on their reading levels or do reading interventions in offices that don't have walls that go all the way to the ceiling, and have classes of kids coming by for art and can't hear the students that they're working with. We have specialists pulling kids out in the halls and trying to do work that they can't be as successful with. And we have kids in what have been repurposed closets. So I think people are very sympathetic at Devotion to the idea that we need more space. The piece, and Dr. Lupini has been several times, Dr. Connolly's talked several times about it, but the other piece is that Monica Crowley, who is going to be the principal at the Old Lincoln School, has been in our building very consistently. Parents know her well at this point. She's at every major Devotion community parent meeting. She put out an electronic survey to parents in the upper grades to ask about what are valued traditions at Devotion that they would like to see continued in a new building. And she has made it very clear through PTO updates. She holds office hours, and parents have begun to schedule time to sit with her and have individual conversations with her. So I think it's pretty well understood, and as Dr. Lupini says, based on my experience working with communications with parents in the past, there will always be parents who will say, I had no idea. But there is a lively conversation in the parent community in the upper grades and understanding that the plan is to go to Old Lincoln next year for 7th and 8th.
There's a Facebook page also and some electronic lists, I think, that people have been talking about this on in the community. So I think they're, aside from official communications, just on their own, so. Okay.
Right, and then just
to answer your question?
That did, and I didn't mean to suggest that I was concerned
No,
that
no,
anything
no.
hadn't been done, but I just wanted to sort of kick the tires a little bit on that and understand.
Great point about Monica. Thank you for raising that. So we go into Pierce? Excellent. Let's go into Pierce. So, as we talked about the last time, we believe we have opportunity to rent space. We've said here in a building adjacent to Pierce, back to my original comment about our negotiating position, in anticipation of use for the 16-17 school year. The anticipated rental cost is somewhere in the neighborhood of $125,000 per year. We would also continue to look at this location and others in the area for additional spaces for early education staff offices, and as I said to you the last time, and the creation of additional common spaces, like the idea of a satellite cafeteria. In other words, space or spaces that we're looking at may have additional spaces available to us in future years. We would want to pay attention to that. In 15-16, we would begin the build-out to create 3 to 4 classrooms in anticipation of use for the 16-17 school year. We've estimated construction costs to do that at around $200,000. And in 16-17, these classrooms, all of which we do not need in that first year. If you look back to the original plan, you'll see the years that we actually need those classrooms. But those classrooms would be available to us, and those that we didn't use could be used for smaller groups. They could be used as offices during that time until we actually needed them as classrooms. To this end, Mr. Rowe, we're preparing to issue a request, is that right, around space?
We believe we've been a little more successful here. There are some spaces available in the Brookline Village area adjacent to the Pierce School where we believe, having toured with the building commissioner, we could rent the spaces and create classrooms that would work for relieving some of the overcrowding over the next few years for the Pierce School. So we'll be issuing an RFP, inviting a couple of different owners to submit their prices, and then we have the opportunity to negotiate with them. So we have to go out to a public bid to do that, but we plan to do that within a month.
So, thank you. So one thing I should say to this, and stay there for a second, and one thing I should say to this, that I should have said at the beginning, is all of this has been vetted with Mr. Cronin. All of it is doable within the draft of the capital improvement plan that he's put forward. They are very comfortable with the plans that we've put forward to date. This building, I'll say the same thing about Baker, much more than we did about Devotion, because we're actually beginning to split certain grades away from the building. I mean, the big concern here is exactly what I said to you last week. It's spaces for adults to work, and it's common spaces. Keeping a K-8 on that campus, I understand that that's what people want us to do, particularly now with the denial, or with the with not being with the SOI for Driscoll not being invited into the eligibility period. That can't make people who were concerned about these short-term plans turning into long-term plans feel any better. Doesn't make me feel any better about those as short-term, right? And so, we have to try to find ways, as we've laid out here, to continue to look for other spaces, even if they are for offices for people, even if they are for specialist spaces for teachers, even if they are for common spaces like a satellite cafeteria. We're going to need to focus on those things over this time. And I will say honestly here, Pierce feels right now, as we sit here today, like we have more opportunities to address some of those things than we may have at Baker. Okay, so that's the Pierce. Any questions on that?
Dr. Jackson?
So I guess my question is, what happens to Sperber in this equation? Does it become part of a long-term conversation potentially, since this is drafted as a short-term plan, or does it sort of disappear and this becomes that plan?
So in terms of the short, now longer-term plan, Sperber's not part of the equation. I mean, the comment I'll make here about Sperber, since it seems to not be part of our space plan around students, is that we have issues at that location with the quality of the space, with the quality of the environment for the adults who work in it. And we're going to have to take some steps over the next number of years to do that. Whether I can't speak to the long-term plan at Pierce, I have no idea what it is. Again, the Driscoll SOI was meant to address some Pierce issues, right? It was meant as part of the plan. It was a bigger plan than the Driscoll School, and that's not going to happen now in the time period that we originally looked at. And so, this plan will address the needs for classrooms we have now, which anticipate Pierce as a 5-section across the grade level school. If we're able to find some of these other spaces in these rental locations and create offices, small group areas, and common spaces, all the better. We're going to need them. If not, we might have to revisit some of the other scenarios that we've talked about here, like Sperber, in my view. Okay?
Just to clarify, so like I asked for the first one, if the rental thing falls through, we don't get rental property, then that's where we go back. You come back
And we would have to come all the way back.
Come all the way
yes.
back. Okay.
But we we believe.
We're more confident about it.
We're very confident. Well, first of all, we're very confident about 5 through 8 in devotion. We have the space. We're ready to make the move, right? That we're confident about our ability to find this space, given the steps. And again, I don't want to go into them here with right.
But having
Mr. Rowe
toured
and
the
others.
facility with the management company, and they're eager to submit a proposal to us, and we're eager to then talk about what it would take to build it out and make it work. And we've worked with Piper Smith Mumford, Dr. Piper Smith Mumford, the principal. She's eager to see it happen. It's interesting, environment affects what goes on. At Pierce School, many students, are used to walking out of one building into another building. The reality is, this would give them another option that's similar to what they're used to. If we introduce that at a different school, it might not be as acceptable, but, so we believe it can work. And so we're optimistic, but.
Thank you for that positive
Update you.
spin, Mr. Rowe.
Anytime.
Ms. Stone.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I was glad to hear you mention Dr. Smith Mumford, because I was going to ask about the relative enthusiasm within the building and sort of.
True in every case, in all 3 of these cases. Yes.
But more to the anticipated rental costs of the spaces to be named later that we're looking at are $125,000 per year. I'm just curious how that compares to what we're paying square foot cost for the BEAP classrooms that we're renting.
We believe it'll be in the ballpark, so that the number we've been quoted is, I want to say, in the high 20s per square foot, which on a net basis, as the realtors all do it, is about what we'd expect. I mean, it's a different part of town. So we believe it'll be competitive and comparable.
Great, so it's not like we're taking this at a premium.
Well, we hope not. One of the reasons we're not
hope not.
talking about
We
the
hope-
exact
right.
address, and it turns out there are a couple of different locations in Brookline Village, so we're going to invite them all to submit.
Right.
And whilst, one might be more advantageous for certain reasons than another, we hope they'll compete.
Great, thank you.
All right. Moving on.
On to Baker School. So Baker School is still the one of these recommendations that is most sort of put out there in a set of options that we're still working with. But I want to be clear about the options that we're working with, right? So option A assumes that we can install portable classrooms prior to September of 15. So we still have to estimate the cost on that, depending on variables, the installation costs, leasing or purchase, as well as the total number. What we know is we need 2 classrooms. I'll just take you back there. We need 2 classrooms for next year. I believe I included this on the other page. We need 1 for 2017 and 1 for 2018. Again, assuming that this short-term plan is now longer term, right? Which it is. So we have a lot of questions on this potential option, starting with could it be done? And we're working really closely with the building department and with the deputy town administrator to even see if this particular option is possible. What we know is that we can have portable classrooms with the cooperation of the building commission and others. We can have portable classrooms in place for September of 2016. What we don't know is if we can pull this off before September of 15. It involves, some use of dollars that wouldn't be allocated till July 1st, right? And it would be a lot of amazing work on the part of the building department. But Mr. Rowe's already begun conversations, and we are continuing to pursue this as an option. It is not ruled out yet, and that's why it's here. If we can't have the portable classrooms for September 15, then we have 2 other options, both of which involve having those portables in place for September of 16. And they would include, in terms of September of 15, consolidating 2 classrooms somewhere in grades 1 through 8. And the exact grade levels and classes have yet to be determined. I want to be really clear about this. These are not the consolidations that we've done over the last number of years. The consolidations that we've taken over the last number of years involved, at the time that we made the decision, underline that the number of students in that grade level had declined to a number that was within our parameters. Okay? We test it with, we have a 5th grade in school X. In June, we determine that even with some number of students who might move in during the summer, we're looking at a number something like 71. We make a decision to consolidate. Sometimes it stays within those numbers. Sometimes in October, you're saying to us, why did you create a class of 26? Because we got it wrong, right? We went with the trends at this building over the past 10 years, and this group didn't trend in that same way. But most of the time, we remain within those numbers. That is not this consolidation. This is a consolidation that says we're going to accept a larger number. We're going to accept a 27. We're going to accept a 28 or more in some grade level. Because as we go through, there really aren't those kinds of clean opportunities now. There's one where if we consolidate today, it'd be 3 classes of 25, right? But the other thing I want you to remember here, and I know you know this, without going into the details, is 25 doesn't equal 25, right? So there are reasons we have a particular grade level with those kinds of numbers in 4 sections right now. But many of those things would be compromised in this model. Okay? So the other is to relocate 1 kindergarten class to the Heath School, which would require us to move an early education class to a location that we don't presently control, and to consolidate 1 other class. The Runkle option we've considered further, and we don't believe it's possible, based on the size of the RISE program, the district-wide special education program located in that building. We don't believe that works. So we're down to these 2 options, and these 2 pieces within the option, neither of which is good. One requires us to move a pre-K out a year earlier than we were going to move it out, to a location that we don't yet control, but maybe in the mix of these other things that we've talked about, like the Pierce solution. And it still involves a consolidation. So we continue to test all of those out. Again, both options B and C all assume portable classrooms are installed prior to September 16. And again, going back to my point about Pierce, if you look at this number here, you'll see, well, you need 4 classrooms. Why would you entertain the idea of 5 or more? Well, because just like the Pierce, we're out of specialist space, we're out of office space, and we're out of common space. And if you add 4 classrooms to that equation over the next 2 to 3 years, you're only going to make that problem worse. We spent quite a bit of the Baker School principal's time today at her budget meeting, I'm sorry to say, talking about when lunch starts and how much worse it will be under this scenario. When does it start? 10:15. So
We don't call it crunch, huh?
we don't. But
Sorry.
so
We're going to have a high schoolers waking up after 10:15 in a couple of years. We're going to call it breakfast.
So that's where we are. I will say, while that feels much squishier than the other options, right? I think invite Mr. Rowe up again if he wants to make a comment on this, but I think some pieces of this will come together soon, meaning in the next month, certainly before the February vacation, we'll begin to have some additional information about what's feasible for September of 15.
That's correct. We'll be engaging an architect to give us some advice as they look at what they think the possibilities are, and advising the building commission and the building department initially on the issues related to installation, because there are some complications. So,
And in the
we'll update you as we get that information.
And in the meantime, we will be testing the other options as if they are options we would take. You know, we have surveyed parents in the past about who's moving, who might be, right? And those usually occur in March or so. At Baker School, they will occur earlier this year. We'll be looking for that information. Dr. Brown is already gearing up to secure some of that information for us much earlier, probably in January, in an effort to make sure we have the most information that we can have in front of us so that we can make the best decisions for our students and the Baker staff.
All right, questions on Baker first, and then just general questions and comments. Mr. Glover?
Do you have any ballpark estimation on the cost of portables? I don't know if we've ever talked about that before.
Ballpark, so we're using a range now of, I think, 50,000 to 200,000 per,
Well,
depending
yes.
on how you, go ahead.
Right, you can lease them. So it really depends on the,
Okay.
there are a host of depends. So we believe that from a cost standpoint, we can structure it in a way, at least initially, so that we can get it. One of the reasons we think we could get it done financially for this coming fall is we'd work on the leasing issue so that we push out some costs till after July 1st, which is when more money will be available. So that's a major issue, but we don't have a firm price right now. There are some variables. Certainly to purchase them is more expensive, but this is really, we have to go through this question of how long-term do we think they'd be there. There may be some value in doing a lease purchase.
So, sorry, so is the range you're working with, I know you maybe don't want to suggest that, but is it 50 to 200 or per
50
year?
to 3, I mean.
Oh, for an individual
Yeah,
classroom?
depending on how we structure.
For an individual
lease,
class, it would be
purchase,
more at the
whatever.
low end. Right, the 200 numbers for multiple units. But the bigger cost initially is actually in the cost of installation. So you have to do and depending where you put it, whether it's connected, if it's connected to the building, you don't have to put in bathrooms. If it's not connected to the building, you do. Where do you connect those? So there's a lot of issues of installation and setup that are really as often more costly than actually the cost of the unit itself.
Go ahead.
Well, just, you could speak to the study that the
Yes, it was done
town
by Flans-
commissioned by
right,
Flansburgh
right,
in
right.
2014 on this issue and the costs that they were looking at the capital cost of all-in of building the classrooms and hooking them up and everything, and they estimated a two-classroom facility at 600 and a three-classroom facility at 900.
Right.
And we're looking at those as the top end and looking for more economical approaches.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Ms. Stone?
This is more of a comment than a question. I just want to say that I know we've been, poor Baker, it's in terms of the uncertainty and all of the options that have gone back and forth. But what I really appreciate about these three options, difficult as they may be in terms of making them happen, is that they really are extraordinarily responsive to what we heard from the Baker community in terms of keeping the school together. And I don't think any of the parents who have written to us have indicated that they are living in a dream world where they can just kind of stay together and not have make other compromises about what staying together at Baker means. And I think I've just been very appreciative of the parents who have written to us in terms of the thoughtfulness of their comments, the clarity of what their main priority was, and the willingness to continue working with us. And I do think that these options, again, they're not great and they're clearly not easy, but they are responsive, and I appreciate that.
just want to echo that point, number one, and to thank the Baker community for being so engaged and reaching out to us with a lot of comments and suggestions and input. We've definitely read your letters very carefully. I didn't see on here anything about Baldwin and Seoul. Have those been ruled out as possibilities in the short term?
Well, Sewell certainly has. Sewell's not ours. And Baldwin has a number of complicating factors, handicap accessibility, et cetera, around, and the issue of, one major program of ours, a high school program, that without relocating, we'd have very minimal numbers of classrooms. We'd have to worry about supervision. I mean, if it was on a longer term, as some people have suggested when they've written, I think we'd have to consider it as a longer term plan. But then we'd still have to worry about those programs, and we don't have an answer for that right now, particularly with an overcrowded high school and a major high school program there.
Mr. Lupsky?
One of the things, did I understand you correctly, Ms. Cox, that at the next meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals, there would be a decision about Hancock Village? Or did I miss?
No, there's a public hearing on Monday, the
Public hearing.
22nd.
But this
Decision
is the next-
mid-January.
Decision mid-January. Does that decision, is that a final decision? Or does it then?
I think it's a final decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals, but then there are other things that could delay that process, particularly litigation, which is anticipated. So.
If this is your question, so we've asked for some estimates.
My question.
So we've asked for some estimates on when, to be frank, and I'd rather not sort of talk to the answers here, but we've continuously asked the question about when we might see students walking down the street from new buildings at Hancock Village to the Baker School.
Right.
And so we're continuously engaged in that, trying to factor that. First of all, we have to know that. Second of all, we have to know sort of a number, and there are all kinds of numbers, into these, right? And they are, let me say this, that at best, what we've been told is they're at the outer years of these short-term space plans.
Right.
Outer years, 1920.
But my thought is, I don't know how you plan for something that you don't know. That's the hardest part. However, to put monies into portables when we may need 6 classrooms or 7 classrooms, when do we have to make that decision by?
When you have better numbers, in my view, when you have better numbers than you have today, number one, and number two, I don't think, if the goal is to keep K-8 together at Baker, and I have to say again that if we'd had a longer term plan, I would have advocated for moving grades for some period of time. But without a plan, I too agree with the parents, although it's going to be, that's a lot of students. We may be looking at that when we see what those numbers look like at those modulars, that building plus, right? And I'm hoping by then we know what those longer term plans are, so that those numbers can be factored into whatever those plans for a 9th school, addition to one of our, whatever, the different elements that are included in, the different elements that are included in the 9th school consideration, which may be an addition to Baker.
Mr. Pollack?
Right, so a couple of things. First, just to this point, the recommendation, I understand the recommendation for adding portable classrooms, additional facilities as Baker is a short-term plan, and it isn't the long-term plan.
Right.
And so no matter what we would do, even if we were to consider building the same facility as an addition to Baker, it'd be hard not to build the portables in the interim anyway. We need the classrooms now. So And I just, for anyone who came in late, I just want to reiterate the fact that we signed, the selectmen on Tuesday night and the school committee tonight signed a contract with the consultant who's going to be looking for more comprehensively for land for additional K-8 school facilities, both for a ninth school facility and also looking at adjacent properties to our existing building. So even though we don't have a long-term plan in place that that we're all sure about, and that there's moving parts and pieces, and we just had the setback on the statement of interest for the Driscoll School, we are moving ahead actively to find and secure a long-term plan. So what I have a question for the superintendent, which is, if we are sort of coming to a close on our discussion of these 3 schools, we do have 6 other schools and the BEEP program. And I think we understand the reason that they're not in here is that they don't need an imminent capital project. But if you would just touch on them, not with all of the detail, but I think with the other 5 elementary schools, I think the answer, which you could confirm, is simply that they're okay for the next couple of years with the facilities that they have. That's the plan. And then just speak briefly to that, to the high school, and also to poor BEEP.
Boy, from the deep recesses here, right? So the elementary schools are pardon?
So do you want me to do it?
I can do this part of this. The elementary schools are they're better than these 3, right? I won't say there aren't issues. There are issues at each one. Even a Runkle, where we have seen an increase in the RISE program, right? And we're going to need to, over the next 18 months, figure out what that means in terms of a second location, whatever that may mean. 2 spaces that we're using that we'd really prefer not to use, like Lincoln. But they're not part of this for a reason, because the issues are much more severe here. Early education, we're spending $550,000 in rental property for what we have now, and we project the need for space to include a high school program and one of the Heath programs over the next number of years, so 2 additional spaces. There would be some question, depending on what we do programmatically, about whether we also need to do something with the Driscoll program. There's still some question about that. And we don't control spaces now. So the $550,000 gets us what we control now, and we'd need additional spaces. And again, if those solutions come about because of some of these other investigations that Mr. Rowe's involved with, terrific. That'd be great. We'd be thrilled. And there's no exit strategy from that. That is our plan. You want to call through at least 2020 our longer short-term plan, so be it, right? It's through at least 2020. The high school, the great part of this particular plan is if everything works out as is being reported through the Devotion Project and in this plan, we would have Old Lincoln School available for the high school at worst in September of 2019. At best, in September of 2018. Again, if the Devotion Project went absolutely, positively, smoothly. And that is right in the wheelhouse of when the headmaster, the assistant headmaster, and the superintendent, when they debate this thing, and the deputy superintendent, believe that we are just out of space at the high school. It's right in that time frame, and that we will need Old Lincoln in that time frame. And so the good news is, people here heard me talking for the last number of months about alternate strategies. If that all worked, we would not need those alternate strategies. If that all worked, as it's laid out now. So, high school, early education, and our other elementaries. Did I miss something?
No, I was just going to say that the key to this is kindergarten enrollment. If we get this year's number and divide the kids into 31 sections like we did this year. The reason we've cited these three schools, Devotion, Pierce, and Baker, is we're putting 5 sections of kindergartners in each year so that we can only bring 3 into the other schools except for Lawrence, where we bring 4, and that's why we're building 4 new classrooms. If we can maintain that, the other schools have the capacity to take the 3 sections, or at Lawrence, the 4 sections. Each of those schools is also close to, well, I was going to say busting at the seams. They're at or over capacity. We know staff are squeezed, lunches are tough. I mean, every school is over capacity.
Yes.
But if we can hold on, if we only bring 3 or 4 sections in, the reason that Pierce and Baker and Devotion are over capacity is because they weren't designed for 5 sections of kids, and that's what the enrollment's done.
Any other questions? I just want to make a couple comments that echo some of my committee members. First is, I just want to say a tremendous thank you, both to you, Dr. Lupini, to Mr. Rowe, all of our principals who have worked so hard on creating this. This has been one of the more responsive processes that I've been part of since my time on school committee. We've discussed this short-term plan at least 3 school committee meetings in the last couple months, at least 3 building forums in the last couple of months, at least 4 office hours in the last couple of months, at least 3 capital subcommittees in the last couple of months. You mentioned at the Board of Selectmen meeting, I'm not sure there is any way, we've posted on Facebook, I really do not know if it is possible to have been more open and transparent and solicitous of feedback. And I think the flip side of that is that we've gotten a tremendous amount of feedback from the community that, again, as Rebecca said a minute ago, and Ms. Cox also, it's just been really reflected in here. So we heard from the Devotion community, please get, in fact, there was actually a little bit of a backlash when we suggested potentially not moving them to Old Lincoln 7 and 8 next year. They said, hey, wait a minute, we just got all excited about Monica and all these amazing things. What do you mean you're not going to move us? Which was an interesting piece of feedback. And we heard a tremendous amount of feedback from the Pierce folks saying, keep us together as a K-8. We heard a tremendous amount of feedback from Baker saying, keep us together as a K-8. Don't consolidate us aggressively in the middle grades and increase our class size, and don't send us to Old Lincoln, and give us portables as soon as possible. So I think that of a tremendous amount, not everything, obviously, but a tremendous amount of parent feedback, of community feedback has been heard, been solicited by us, and been incorporated here. So just a big thank you. I think the second thing is that what's clear to me out of all of this is that the CIP that we so desperately depend on needs capacity in it to be able to do all of the kinds of things that we're talking about. So forget about big capital projects like Devotion, which is going to have a debt exclusion, and a high school, which is going to need its own debt exclusion one day and whatnot. I'm not talking about those, but even things like this, if we think about what has to happen in the next 3 years, in the 9th elementary school, even a study, that money comes out of the CIP. As I think about Old Lincoln upgrades, there's some amount of money that was in the CIP. We're going to need more to upgrade it in the next 3 years. We're going to need our regular ongoing classroom upgrades in the next 3 years. We're going to need portables, we're going to need rentals near Pierce, we're going to need build out of rental space, we're going to need more beep rentals. I mean, as I sit back and think about all of the demands of what we're going to need even in the next 3 years, I appreciate the fact that, Sean Cronin and Peter have been talking about this, but I just don't want anyone to think that this is cost free, right? We need that capacity to be able to do things like this. So when people talk about, we don't know what the projects are going for, this is what the projects are going for. This is exactly why we budget money in a CIP. And it still goes through the town meeting approval process and all that sort of thing, but it's just really important that that we have that capacity and flexibility. I think the other thing that I would say a thank you on is that this committee has pushed very hard on costs. And I think harder, each year I feel like we push harder and harder on costs. So this year, for the first time, and we have been pushing a far different conception of portable classrooms than has been historically discussed in this town, as Helen continues to remind us, and David, who was on the building commission for 10 years, continues to remind us. But as we've thought about portables, that these are not the $1 million portables. This is not a bricked over, totally hooked up Lawrence addition that looks exactly the same as Lawrence classrooms. These are things that are potentially, children need to walk outside in the snow for 90 seconds. We're not talking about freezing them out there. We are talking about them going into another building with their coats on. And I understand that that's not historically been the conversation in this town, that in this town, things have to be absolutely beautiful, absolutely perfect, and, you know, which is fine, but I think we're all very cognizant that given the capital pressures that are on our budget, that $1 million portables are not in the cards, and as attractive as the Sperber solution was, it just couldn't make it through a filter like this when we're talking about, you know, $100,000 for a portable. Things like that don't make it through the filter, and so I guess we've pushed really hard for more cost-effective options, more options, and you all keep giving them to us. So thank you for that. It's much appreciated. So. More to come, but I think what's important is for us to vote this, and I guess it seems to me that a yes vote is that, yes, this is the range of things that we're considering. We are not considering other things, and some of these things, I would assume that if they come to fruition, you will sign. I think you know our priorities, that if a lease comes up, you will recommend that we sign it as quickly as possible. I'm recognizing that we're going into a few weeks of vacation and hiatus here, but like, this is the set of options. You know the priorities that from our point of view, and that if they come up, we're going to move forward with them. Is that more or less what people are comfortable voting at this point?
So moved.
Thank you. Second, Dr. Jackson. All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. What would be helpful is, actually, maybe we can send this out, Barbara, to TMMA, because it's the final. We can try to post it on Facebook as well. Is this going to get sent out over Connect Ed before the holiday?
This?
Tomorrow? Since we voted it?
It's on our website.
So how is it going to get, so let me ask it as a question. How is the community going to know, like the Baker community, the Pierce community, the Devo community in particular?
Well, we'll try to put it out that way.
Well, yes, everyone's blogging, thank you for that, but from us.
Yeah, I was going to say Jenna's going to tell them, right?
Jenna, are you telling them like now? Okay.
She already did.
Do you have all their email addresses? No, no.
We'll do it.
Well, yeah, because
We'll
all
put it
joking aside, I mean, there won't be a tab before, I mean, people are going to be gone.
We'll
That's fine.
We'll
But people are going to be gone. So thank you for posting it tomorrow. We appreciate that.
put it out as well.
Thank you. Okay. So from, I don't even know what to call this, the no override scenario.
Yeah, so, so we were asked to put together for the Board of Selectmen a no override scenario. And that presentation was done in two pieces. First, the town administrator laying out where he saw the town-school partnership, and then further assumptions on the part of the town. Robin, do we not have, is this one not working? Is this one not working? And then we talked about what that might look like. Is it, oh, it's me, okay. There it comes. Will it just come up now? Yeah, okay. So let me walk you through this, and to do that, I'm going to skip to the end to talk about some assumptions, because I think the assumptions that are here are really a big part of the story, right? So again, what was done here is the town-school partnership was run with an enrollment component. And then there was a conversation about what we were left with as a deficit, and what part of that the town would take on. Okay, so there was an assumption we were moving to Old Lincoln for next year. There was an assumption around early education rentals, et cetera. So let me talk through a couple of these because I know we've spent some time since, and I know you'll want to talk about some of them tonight. So in this scenario, there was no assumption of any non-tax revenue being brought to the table in FY16, meaning that in the Override Study Committee report, where it specifies that they believe that an additional $2.9 million in non-tax revenues, parking meters, budget reductions on the part of the town could be generated, that none of those were assumed for FY16 in a no override scenario. Okay? Now, you know, because a number of you were at that meeting and the town and the Board of Selectmen continue to discuss this, there's some hesitation on the part of some of those recommendations, some of them that involve the schools. So the number may not be 2.9, but what's important for tonight is the number for FY16 in a no override scenario is 0. The second item is that the $550,000 in preschool rental remains in the capital improvement plan. Okay, so that remains under this scenario in the CIP, not put on our books. Special education growth is targeted at $750,000. Collective bargaining is assumed to be 2%. Steps for our teachers, our collective our contracts that are collectively bargained are assumed to be a net of $675,000, which is a neighborhood full amount of about $1 million. The issue for me that you've continued to hear me talk about, and I'll talk about them some more, I'm sure, as I go through the specific numbers, is that the town-school partnership has an assumption for enrollment. It, however, is an exceptionally narrow definition of enrollment. The definition of enrollment in the town-school partnership is a teacher in a classroom. It's the number of sections that we add. There is no component in the town-school partnership within the category enrollment that talks about that when a school becomes a certain size, it needs more literacy specialists, it needs more math specialists, it needs more guidance counselors, it needs more nurses, it needs more administrators, it needs more special educators, it needs more OT, it needs more PT, it needs more speech. None of that is included in the definition of enrollment in the town-school partnership. And so this maintains that very narrow definition of enrollment, which is one of those elements, right, that works until it doesn't work. It works until a school becomes a certain size, and then it ceases to work. The health insurance increase is assumed to be 4%. And I think really relevant in today's world, right, is there are certain assumptions about growth of Chapter 70 and local revenue. And, of course, there's going to be a lot of discussion about Chapter 70 and unrestricted general government aid at the state level. So with those as the assumptions, then let me go back. So you've seen this chart way too many times. This lays out the 3 years and what we were looking at in terms of override. What's been referred to as catch-up is referred to here as enrollment-driven, right? Because those elements that were in that category that we were calling catch-up are enrollment-driven items. They are guidance counselors. They are nurses. They are as enrollment-driven as a classroom teacher or as an art teacher, a music teacher. They are as enrollment-driven as those categories. There are a number of other pieces that we've categorized here as best practice. The changes that we're making to our literacy program belong in best practice. They're not enhancements. They're an attempt to create programming that actually over time we believe reduces costs, much like our discussions years ago about first grade paraprofessionals, kindergarten paraprofessionals that actually have controlled costs. Those are best practice. So this, you've seen this many times with that characterization. So so in a no override scenario, again, the problem The main problem is that nothing in enrollment-driven best practice and technology is funded, and we have a $1.3 million shortfall. I'll repeat that. Nothing in enrollment-driven best practice and technology is funded, and we have a $1.3 million shortfall. So what Mr. Kleckner suggested to the Board of Selectmen is that because that $1.3 million shortfall is made up of things like our move to Old Lincoln School, the elements that have to go into that, opening that as a school, that they would split that they would assume 50% of that cost. And he detailed a list of items that they might have to look at to accomplish that. I'm not going to go into that list. So we're left without any enrollment-driven changes, without any best practice increases, without the second year of our technology plan, let alone the third year and the fourth year, and a $650,000 shortfall. Okay? So again, let's pull out those three areas where there's about $4.35 million in year one. And we said, in terms of this exercise for you, okay, you'll notice that they were very front-end loaded. It's been too long. You've heard me say that many, many times. We haven't funded guidance counselors. We haven't funded nurses in all of this period of time of enrollment growth. It's been too long. It needs to happen now. So we front-end loaded it. We've said that from the beginning. So what if we looked at a slightly different approach, and instead of front-end loading it, we merely took it in thirds? We said we can only implement a third of enrollment-driven this year, only a third or so of the best practice and of technology, right? That adds $2.4 million. So some people have asked me, what's your shortfall? Best case scenario. What's your shortfall in a no override scenario? The answer is $3 million. The $600,000 that we start with, and this 2.4. It's $3 million. Unless you assume we're not going to do any part of the technology plan, we're not going to do any of the best practice work, we're not going to do any of the enrollment-driven work. So the question really here is what when we talk about a no override scenario, it is what is your what assumptions are you making? I've said a number of times, I don't believe there's a scenario that I could recommend to you where we don't at least look at some of the enrollment-driven changes, at least some of the enrollment-driven changes, right? So is your shortfall another $600,000 in enrollment-driven plus the $600,000 you have in the base budget? Is it 1.2? Is it 2.4? What's the number? And obviously then the exercise that we have to go through is this wonderful exercise of looking, as we started to do at a finance meeting earlier this week, looking at the cost of programs and trying to come up with, in a no override scenario, what would we do? And again, to the point that some people would say, well, you can't do any of the new stuff. This Mr. Kleckner said in his presentation. His assumption is that the voters decide on enrollment-driven best practice and technology. And I would beg to differ. As I said that night, I actually believe the school committee decides that. Right? And so if you include any part of that, you could easily see yourself at a scenario of $1.1 million where you'd have to look closely at something like staff reductions at the high school associated with the 4+1 program or the elementary world language program or any of another of the rest of a menu of ideas of what you might have to reduce. And even if you agreed with what the town administrator said that night, you have to cut $700,000 from your budget. Even if you support his point that you shouldn't do anything new because the voters would have rejected enrollment-driven best practice and technology, then you still have to cut $700,000 from your budget, and we're going to be having these same conversations around things in our existing program. So as we start through, actually, we've almost concluded our meetings with principals. And we are looking at two different types of budgets for you. Now, there will probably be more, depending on how the Board of Selectmen create their question or questions. But one is a no override scenario budget. And the other, we're making some assumptions about the kinds of things, kinds of numbers they may go to that we can adjust off of. But we're having to put together, and you will see on February 12th, certainly we'll discuss before that, what the scenarios can look like or would need to look like in a no override scenario that I believe must, under any circumstance, increase some of those categories like enrollment-driven concerns. So, and do you want to say a word about what was prepared for the Board of Selectmen and what we provided them with in terms of the summaries of the 90% and 65%? Do you want to say a word about that?
Sure, just in terms of making sure that everyone was aware that what the range of positions was and how it varied between the 90% and the 65 and the original package that we had put together, so that they could see how the, if you will, how with each change, how there was less, we're putting fewer resources to each particular area.
And what some of the choices are that we made in terms of the scenarios, and they're only scenarios, we've said that enough, they're not your budgets. What scenarios we've put forward in our discussions with the Board of Selectmen. So that was laid out in terms of the original model that was created, right? And then the 90% scenario and the kinds of choices that we put forward as a scenario in that, and then the 65% scenario. And we may make sure, I don't know if everyone has that, but we should make sure school committee members all have that as well.
Did it go out to anyone? I don't know if it's gone out.
Okay, so
Okay.
it has not.
Right. So
It has not.
Okay, so I
And
think.
when it does, you will see it.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. Yeah, and just so people know, I mean, that, again, in case there's confusion about this later, this is a set of things that the school committee has discussed and agreed are sets of things we are discussing.
Right.
They are things, they are not budget decisions. We have a whole budget hearing process for the next number of months with the public. We have public hearings, we have a whole public process. And so once this spreadsheet becomes public, I just want everyone to be clear about what this is and what this isn't. Are we clear? Okay.
We're clear about what we don't know.
I guess we're clear that this is the range of things that we are discussing, that it's not a set of commitments, that
Right.
if there is a 90% put on the ballot, this is exactly what will happen. This is a set of things we are discussing.
Right, so let me just go back to sort of end this and then.
Is that really, I mean, really, that has to be clear, because, okay. Do you want to say something about that?
Just wanted to clarify it. So the selectmen have, in all of their conversations about how to reach their own conclusion about an override number or numbers, they have been asking for a single page, like every congressman I've ever known. They want all of the information on a single page, so that they can look across. So all it really is putting on a single page, which takes some doing, and Bill and Peter have been working at this a lot, the scenarios that we have talked about up until now. So they've been it's all of the presentations that we've heard many times about the different scenarios. The key is it's on one page, and so you can look across.
Right,
and the selectmen, as I said, have been asking for that.
Right, there is no new information there. As you've seen the 65 and 90% scenarios we presented, it's those presented in a different form.
And while we're on this, I mean, they did ask for, can you put a zero, a no override number on there? And after a little bit of back and forth, let me try to characterize this, and you can correct it where I get this wrong. After a little bit of back and forth, we have not had those conversations, right? This is one of our first looks. We are early on this one. Sometimes we're late on things. This one we're actually really, really early on. We're months early on. So what we've said to them is, it is similar to the range of things under the 65% scenario and significantly worse. And through the FY16 budgeting process, which we're about to go through, we will talk about specifically how much worse. We will look at specific ideas, we'll have public hearings, we'll have public comment. I mean, we will go through the process, and it'll probably have to be a little bit compressed. Sometimes the process can last until April, you know, it probably can't this year. It's probably gonna have to be a little bit more compressed. But so there isn't actually a no override column on that spreadsheet, not because we don't know that's an option, we do, but because we're not prepared at this point to start cutting millions and millions of dollars without going through something like a budget.
Right, the only thing we could have
But
done.
we will do it.
The only thing we could have done is create one simple scenario, you know, that said, we start out with a $650,000 shortfall. Let's say we fund $500,000 of the enrollment driven. We now have a $1.1 million shortfall, and we cut X, right? We could have laid that out. It would have required that we go through and say, okay, funding $500,000 of the enrollment driven means this many guidance counselors, this many and we just weren't prepared to do that detailed of a scenario at this point.
And how much more, just in year one, how much more from the 65% year one number, how much more are we looking for? So there's the 65%, you've already suggested a whole set of things, but we would be looking for an additional amount more that we would need to cut under a no override scenario.
So that was an $8 million over 3 years, and this is
Right.
$3 million in one,
Yeah, approximately.
ish.
It was front-end loaded, so it was, depending on how you.
Well, that's cutting out the front-end loading.
That's what I'm asking. Like, I think it's worth to sort of, all of us, as we head off for the holidays, to just have a number in our head. Is like, there's the 90, there's the 65, there's some more that we would have to
Sure.
wrap our mind
So-
around,
so-
ballpark.
So apples
No
to
override.
apples,
Yep.
maintaining the front-end loading, it actually means $5 million in year one. Apples to oranges, meaning taking the 3 years and saying, let's just take a third in each year rather than front-end loading, it's what I showed you here, it's $3 million.
So an additional 3 million.
Right.
Off of the 65%. Or off of the 100%.
Yes, ish,
Right.
yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so the one comment I want to make is, you know, I made a comment earlier about Baker as we were looking at the one potential scenario, right? The idea of consolidations. And I said, this is not your 2008 through 2013 consolidation, carefully looked at, making sure it fits within parameters. When we would consider consolidations in the no override scenario, which could happen at any and every building, they will not be done that way. They will drive class size up, guaranteed. If that's the scenario, if that's what we were presented with, that's what we would have to do. We wouldn't be able to escape that.
Well, I think we're ready for eggnog. Questions? So we will have a Finance Committee meeting in January where we can talk about this more. I suspect that each of the next 4 Tuesdays or more Tuesdays at the Board of Selectmen, this will be a topic of discussion along with the debt exclusion. It will be a discussion at all of the meetings that we showed at the beginning of the year, except policy maybe. Maybe policy will escape. Oh, maybe not. No, you'll find a way.
It'll get in there, yeah.
It's in there for curriculum because we're doing ECS. It's in there for finance. It's in there for it's in there for office hours. It'll be, basically, we will have at least a dozen opportunities in public meeting over the course of January alone to talk about this, but this was just a preview.
I'm sorry to do this, but I did have one question, or actually sort of a statement, but so that new members who haven't gone through this budgeting process as much. As we get numbers from the town, you know, they get better and better in terms of what the available funding will be. And I don't remember when those markers are, when we start to get, I know that the numbers now are not as clear as they would be, for instance, in April, once we know the health care and that. But there's also some other numbers that start to come in that help us to know what our revenues will be for next year.
Well, a couple of things. One moving part that's going to be delayed this year is the governor's budget.
Oh,
The
God.
new governor, so the firm number on Chapter 70 probably won't be known until
After we
later.
present our budget.
Right, so normally we know it in January at least. We probably won't know until after we present the budget. So we're working on the assumptions that Sean has put together, which we think are reasonable. Health insurance will be another one. The current number we're pegging is a 4% premium increase. I think local revenues are probably going to be within the range, I mean, are not going to change significantly. So those would be probably the three biggest, if you will, moving parts.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I want to say to that, not to be the wet blanket again, but is that, you know, Mr. Cronin was asked to change some of his normally very, very conservative assumptions to not be so conservative in this exercise. When you do that, you don't get the big surprises that we've sometimes been used to, right? The good surprises. Yeah, the good big surprises, right? They're not as big. You may still get them, but the health insurance that comes in at 2%, if that's what it is now only 2 percentage points off from what you estimated instead of the 3, and that's $250,000. So
He's built some in already.
he built in some more favorable assumptions than we've had in the past in an effort to make some of this work through the override study process and in the early stages of the work with the Board of Selectmen. And, you know, we'll see how those pan out. So, you know, but the budget process in terms of when we get numbers from the state, and again, the governors are going to be delayed, and then you go through the process with the House and the Senate. That can stretch into May, or does stretch into May, excuse me.
Right, and the more recent news we've heard from the state is not good.
No,
So,
it is not.
So we're, as we say, we're working with the best numbers we have, and we'll continue to do that.
Yeah, no, but I think that's helpful just in terms of laying it out for people in terms of what to expect one way or the other.
Right, traditionally, I mean, this came up at the Selectmen's meeting last night. So February 17th is when the FY16 budget is typically submitted. We do have, as Peter said, flexibility when there's a new administration to go, to get an extension past that. And so if I think the date was, let me see if I can, I don't know if I wrote it down. It would go to 7 days after the governor issues his budget, which would be, if he chose to do it, would be March 4th, so that would be March 11th. But I think the issue on the other side of that is you cannot wait, like, we just can't wait that long to put a budget out. And so,
But, okay, why not?
well, we have a lot of decisions.
For one information. I mean,
Okay.
my sense is if the Board of, my sense is if the Board of Selectmen create a question or a set of questions that people want to know as many specifics of those questions as they can possibly know. And so, you know, essentially, you know, in those processes, we're creating budgets to give people information as to what could be, right, given the best information that we have in front of us. So listen, I'd love to take an extra, what is that, 4 weeks? Yeah, but I don't actually think that's a good idea.
No, I guess it's not, especially since, yeah.
And did I say I'd like to do it? Did I
Yes,
mention
you
that?
did.
Okay.
When
But-
do we normally do public hearings on the budget? We do a public hearing, we do
See,
multiple public forums.
I don't think,
We do a
I don't
budget hearing.
think this, yes, you do. I don't think this has to change your budget timeline.
Well, but don't you think that people are going to want to know what's the consequence of a no override? What,
Yes.
That's our budget.
But-
That's our budget hearing.
But
but typically, when do we, I'm just trying to remember what
April
month.
10th, usually we vote
Yeah.
on it.
That
something
Yeah,
feels
like
but
like
that.
that's,
We vote,
but
so
the
it's-
but the idea, I think that Susan is getting at, which I would certainly support, is that because of the nature of the conversation around the FY16 budget, which becomes what is the consequence of
A
the
failed
override
override.
failing, right? So people are going to want to know more, as you were just saying, Dr. Lupini, what that's going to feel like. What are we, the selectmen, to put a number on the ballot, the selectmen want to know what people would be asked to buy with that money, that we're giving them in the different scenarios. But the question of what happens if it fails is the question of the conversation around the FY16 budget. And so I think that you're right, that it does track very nicely in terms of moving towards a May vote on the override, those conversations, but we can't wait till April to have a public hearing on the FY16 budget. That as we are discussing the budget, as we typically do with you, that maybe some of what you have done out in the community, in terms of community forums, maybe become public hearings with the school committee. I don't know how we're going to do it, and obviously it's up to the chair and to put this on the schedule, but I would think that public conversation that we normally have through your presentations to the public would become more of a back and forth on the various pieces
So I'm just thinking about it timeline-wise, right?
Yeah.
So we present the budget on the 12th. Mr. Rowe, the first week of March, comes in and presents the detail of the budget. We get the governor's budget in mid-March. We have to make adjustments to that. Now it's your second meeting you see where I'm going?
Yeah.
It is
Oh,
April.
Yeah.
Of course, right.
No,
It is- now it is April.
March 26th would be in a normal process, March 26th would be the normal.
But we will have
And
just,
April 9th would have been.
but
the-
we will have just received the governor's, well, maybe, the governor's budget.
The latest it
in-
would be March 11th, but still.
Okay.
Still.
Okay.
Again, that's what I want us each to, I mean, yes, thank you for saying that. I'm happy to schedule a public hearing, but I really need to sort of hear from folks as to the timing of that, because just to put it very simply, the later we wait, the better information we have. The earlier we do it, the more, the
More
funnel.
things are up in the
Right,
air.
more things are up in the air, and the funnel looks like this and not this. I mean, it's what we just did with this short-term space plan, right? The budget could be X to Y. It's a much broader range, and so it's very, very hard to shoot at something that's such a broad set of possibilities. But the later we wait, I think the more we're going to face the question from the public of, what happens if the override fails?
Well, but the
And if we
superintendent's
wait,
budget message and budget are out there during that
yes,
time.
but they're going to ask the school committee, is that exactly what you're going to do? Like, where are the school committee's priorities, right?
Okay.
So,
Dr. Lapine, I really don't think we're that far apart. I
Right.
mean, I understand that what you're thinking about sort of getting much more specific and much more committed to the budget message.
Right.
And we normally have a lot of iterations. And I think what we are going to have to do is allow a lot more conversation around what's in the budget message. Understanding that there's uncertainty there, understanding that there's a lot of information that still won't come in, but have more of the back and forth around what's in the message than we would typically wait until we had more certainty. And that's, I think, where we get squeezed in terms of the timing.
well, I also think that we get questions like, what's the strategy, right? Are you going to do none of the other enrollment supports, none of the best practices, none of the technology? Or are you going to say, at a very minimum, we've got to do a third of each of those and cut in other areas to protect that? I mean, I think even just some of those big trade-offs, I don't think it necessarily, I mean, as Rebecca said, it doesn't have to be at the line item level, every $10,000 level in February, March, and it can't be anyway. But I think just how we're thinking about it is going to, we're already getting it, and we're kind of saying it is part of the budget development process.
I think we ought to timeline this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we are closer, maybe I'm wrong.
I don't.
So if we try to timeline this, if we try to get the best information we can, on when the governor has to create a budget by, it's March 11th.
Sean said March 11th. Sean said.
Right,
he
no, I'm
had-
not questioning that, but my understanding is that that's not going to affect the town in terms of
No.
their budget
No, but
schedule.
it'll affect our adjustment to it.
It'll affect the adjustments.
Correct, but my presumption is we'll still go forward on February 12th with no override budget.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
But no, I
that's
think
right.
what you're asking is how late are we going to get new information that could materially.
June,
affect-
July? No,
June.
I'm not being facetious, as you know, we always get.
Well, it's always
those-
June, that's why we
Right.
did, that's
The
why
most
the time to the
significant,
budget-
obviously, the most significant piece of information that'll come to us this year is in May from the override vote. I mean, that's the one that really will make or break where we are, right?
But the GIC comes in March, the
Right.
budget, I mean, anyway, it might be helpful just to your point of like just to timeline it and say, here's what information comes in when, and we just can't be clearer until we get to these points about
Right.
the trade-off.
Just the one other thing I want to make sure I say in this, that I don't think this is what anybody's saying, but, the superintendent's budget message isn't a surprise, right? If it is, we have a problem. We have a bigger problem than right? So if we do that right over the next 6 weeks or so, then I'm hoping that we are on the same page largely with respect to the answers to those questions. That's my point.
So one other little wrinkle, it's a big wrinkle in all of this, is there's a certain time when we have to give notice to staff.
April 15th.
April 15th. So that's another pivotal date, I think, in terms of what we're planning on doing and how wide that notice has to happen.
Right, and just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I think you're probably going to say what I was going to say, or maybe not. We've done this before. We've been in a situation
Right.
where we had to, by law, notice people that there was not going to be, because the revenues, we can't assume on April 15th that we're going to have the revenues, because we won't know until May 3rd, 4th, 5th.
5,
5th.
May 5th, May 5th, May 5th.
And so.
Right, so the trick
So the
is.
trick is, right.
The trick is to be as specific as you can, because I don't believe in blanket noticing people.
Right.
There are districts where they do that. They just say, let's cover ourselves in this situation. We'll notice everyone who's non-professional status in any department where we don't do that. And yet leaving enough room to give us the ability to make changes to our scenario as late as we
And
possibly
not
can.
have people leave because they think they
Right,
don't have
all
a
of
job.
that. All of that is very,
All those pieces,
is very difficult.
yes. Okay.
A great night.
Is there anything we can end on maybe someone can tell us a heartwarming story about a child? I will take anyone from the audience who has, you know what I will tell you? I will tell you that I spent 6 hours today chaperoning a field trip of 70 fourth graders to the Peabody Museum. We went on the T from Driscoll School. Imagine all 70 fourth graders, 12 chaperones marching down the street. We got on the T, we went into Park Street, we got on the red line, trying to get them all from the green line to the red line. We spent the day at the Peabody Museum. We looked at, Inuit artifacts. We looked at all sorts of horses, from the Dakota cultures. We looked at shoulder blades that had been turned into axes. It was tons of fun.
Glass flowers.
That's where the glass flowers are. We did not look at glass flowers. This is very
That sounds like a great day.
So that was a good day. I think
And cost effective.
and
in
very
terms-
cost effective. We didn't even have a bus. All the kids were free. So on that note, I will wish everyone a very happy New Year. Thank you all for staying till the end. We have an executive session, unfortunately, for my school committee. Maybe fortunately, actually. It might be, I don't know, who knows? We'll see what happens. All right, so we need to go into executive session to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining and to discuss strategy in preparation for negotiations with non-aligned personnel. Ms. Coyne, for one last time, in 2014, will you poll the committee?
Yes.
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 Yes. I don't know, that's what it says.
Yes.
Thank you, we're,
Meeting quickly?
quickly.